That night, a black car parked in front of the famous HU Hotel. A man in a light gray suit advises his boss not to go to the bar. After all, he had just arrived from a business trip, and some employees might feel embarrassed to have dinner with the boss. But the man, the owner of the hotel chain, ignores the secretary and gets out of the car while the other was still talking. The owner of the company innocently tells his secretary that he knew his employees would love to see him there. The blonde-haired man tries to warn him that it wasn't a good idea, but the CEO says he heard great things about the new intern and really wanted to meet her. The secretary says he prefers to go home to watch a show, even under the boss's protests, who hints that he should drop those shows and go on some dates. The CEO takes the opportunity to reveal something to his secretary. He becomes curious to hear what his boss has to say. The man reveals that he is tired of going on dates and has decided to get married. The secretary asks him if the chosen one is Sarah, to which he replies, yes. He wanted to marry the beautiful Sarah. The boss explains that although things are going well at the hotel, his father keeps hounding him. He thinks that if he gives the old man what he wants, he'll finally be at peace. He says he went out with several women, but none of them were like Sarah. He confesses that he had never met anyone like her before. His secretary remains silent as he listens to the boss say he tried to get close to her several times with no success. He looks at his watch, hopeful that she is still at the company dinner, since they chose a restaurant very close by. The secretary stays silent, taking all of that in. The blonde guy assumes that his boss is used to getting everything he wants with women. Even when he simply walked down the street, the girls sighed in love. However, the young man didn't know if he actually understood what love was. A few blocks ahead, there is a pub with its illuminated sign. Suddenly, everyone who was already very drunk celebrating becomes completely paralyzed, drooling into their drinks and dropping their food. The boss enters a bit hesitant, and by everyone's reactions, he realizes Barney, his secretary, was right. He could almost hear his voice in his head. He asks everyone to continue their celebration and not mind him. Trying to fix the situation, he tells everyone to order whatever they want to eat or drink. It's on him. And then immediately, everyone goes back to celebrating. The CEO lets out an awkward laugh after seeing how quickly everyone changed their attitude. Right after that, he spots someone in the crowd, a young woman with red hair. It's Sarah. His love interest was right there celebrating with her coworkers, drinking a nice pint of beer. The young woman gives her boss a friendly smile. He blushes slightly, but mentally feels grateful he came. Then the man notices that next to the young woman, there is an empty chair. It's the perfect opportunity. He approaches, asking permission to sit next to her, but something unexpected interrupts his words. Under the table, a bizarre creature that looks like a woman starts to slowly emerge, leaving the CEO paralyzed in shock. He lets out a huge scream. Sarah asks her coworker if she found her earring, and while the girls talk, the boss wonders where that woman had come from. The young woman looks at him with her big brown eyes, and he turns very red, wondering if he really screamed that loud. Sarah introduces the young woman to the CEO. Her name is Jenny, and she is the new intern at the company and our protagonist. Out of respect for the man, she bows to greet him. After many rounds of drinks, the CEO watches Jenny with an uninterested expression, and he remembers how the other employees had praised the young woman, saying that besides being pretty, she was very talented. Before he can start complimenting her mentally, she shoves a Korean hot dog into her mouth, completely lacking elegance. An employee gets excited with the microphone. On the girl's plate, he notices there are several chicken bones. She really had eaten all that. A very drunk guy approaches the young women, complaining that they had been sitting for too long and should join him for a drink. Without refusing, she explains that she will drink more soju instead of beer because beer makes her feel too full. After all, she needs to keep room for more food, right? The drunk guy starts laughing loudly, and everyone looks at him in judgment. While pouring soju for Jenny, he says that she has a beautiful face and should smile more. Approaching her in a creepy way, he says that she looked beautiful when she smiled at the hotel guests. He gives a very malicious smile and asks her to give him a smile. But the young woman looks at him with an indifferent stare, as if she felt disgust for that man. He actually feels bothered by that reaction, wondering what was wrong with that employee of his. The man hears Jenny surprisingly asking the drunk man if he wanted to see her smiling, and logically, she says that he should then go visit the hotel, leaving him speechless. Sarah watches in silence, and right there, on the other side, the boss lets out a laugh. Everyone notices how Jenny shut down that annoying guy, showing how intelligent and independent she was. He slams the glass bottle on the table, asking her if that was any way to talk to her superior. Trying to fix the situation, Sarah approaches saying that his glass looked empty, already bringing him a beer to cheer him up. She says that Jenny had just arrived and that she was sure Jenny really wanted to work with him. While the young woman pours more beer for the man, who is already beyond drunk, he tells Sarah that she is the best and that if Jenny wanted to be hired permanently, she should learn from her. Despite spilling a little beer on him, Sarah asks with a smile that he see that as the overflowing respect she feels for him. He, completely soaked in beer, says that she must respect him very much then. Everyone there praises Sarah a lot and her competence as an employee. He looks at her, slightly blushing, very interested in the young red-haired woman. At the exit of the bar, everyone says goodbye. The CEO wonders what he was doing there. He approaches Sarah, trying to be romantic, and noticing she had had a few beers, he offers to take her home. But the young woman politely refuses, saying she had already called a taxi. The man feels hurt, wondering what he could have done for her not to find him attractive. After all, his name was printed across all the top business magazines in Korea. Stanley Kwan, an influential, rich man, very desired by women. He thought of himself as absolutely perfect. Yeah, right. He gets frustrated, mentally throwing a tantrum, wondering why Sarah did not return his love. Around the other men, he hides his pain well, pretending everything was fine. The other employees offered to call him a taxi or even give him a ride home. While Stanley says goodbye to everyone, Jenny walks near him, moving in a strange way. Completely drunk, she looks at him. Just the weird look from that woman is enough to scare him. He wonders how many times that crazy woman will still scare him that night. You can tell she is very drunk because she is walking completely unbalanced. Stanley wonders where she might be going. Did she live nearby? He wonders why she is heading to the hotel basement. And why was he still following her? Our protagonist was so drunk she didn't even notice she was being followed by the hotel CEO. He keeps following her, wondering where she might live. He himself lived in the penthouse. Stanley watches Jenny making her way through the parking lot, walking totally dizzy because of the alcohol. And now she was in the basement? At this point, he was far too curious to leave her alone. What was a young woman like her doing there? She turns to him, her face red because of the alcohol. And he gets scared again, but manages to hide behind a wall. Frightened, he wonders why he would be hiding in his own hotel. Still wondering why all that was happening, he approaches the storage basement door. He holds the doorknob, noticing that no one from the hotel had used that room for a long time. He looks through the crack of the door, wondering why she went in there. And then he comes across Jenny. Embarrassed, the young woman was beginning to change her clothes. Stanley, as the hotel CEO, was a smart, rich, and very attractive man. He drew the attention of women wherever he went. Meanwhile, the girl was watching him while other women whispered about him. At the same time, a young woman caught the CEO's attention. He gives a friendly smile to the girl, and she returns it with a delicate smile. On the other side of the elevator, Jenny watches that uninterested. She takes advantage of the opened door so she can get away from all that commotion. Besides everything, Stanley was a huge playboy. Back to the present, in the hotel basement, he is still stunned by the recent events. And what is that injury on his face? Jenny and Stanley stare at each other in silence after the compromising moment. She asked if his face was okay. Very annoyed, he asked what she was going to do about that scratch. Moments earlier, because of the scare, Jenny had slapped Stanley's face. However, she didn't notice there was a hidden button that had caused such damage. Trying to help him, she tries to touch his face, saying she would like to help him by offering an ointment. But Stanley was a very arrogant man, and he slaps the young woman's hand away, pushing her aside, and then directly asks her what she was doing there and what all those things were. She confesses they are personal things she used to carry with her. He asks her if she brings all that when she goes to work. He points to a pair of panties with a teddy bear on them. Immediately, she runs to hide the item while he coughs in embarrassment. While she is picking up the panties, he asks her if she had been living in his hotel for free, without paying any rent. She turns around and says she could pay $30. Stanley doesn't understand anything. Jenny tries to negotiate, claiming she could pay $30 to live there in the basement. He asks if she would pay per day, but she answers it would be the monthly payment. Impatient, our protagonist explains that there was no air conditioning, no bathroom, no windows. Besides the smell of mold, so $30 per month was a more than reasonable price. Despite the girl's arguments, he tells her to leave because her money didn't interest him, and if something happened to her down there, he would be responsible. It wasn't worth taking such a risk for $30. Insisting on negotiating her stay in the basement, Jenny says she could organize the entire storage area and also work night shifts. She explains that she needs to stay for at least 3 months, and that she didn't want to bother him with a long story. Still trying to keep her home, even temporarily, she says she has a skillful body. The young woman's words catch the CEO by surprise. He blushes a lot and is shocked imagining what she might be suggesting. He gets irritated, asking if she thinks he is some kind of pervert. He didn't want to hear anything else. Jenny simply clarifies that she is a strong woman, she could carry heavy boxes or even perform manual labor. Annoyed with the whole situation, Stanley insists that she leave immediately. Suddenly, a phone starts ringing, distracting Jenny. She answers the phone, revealing it is Sarah calling, and tells her friend that she had her scarf and would return it during work the following week. As she hangs up the phone, she asks Stanley what he was talking about again. Scaring Jenny, the man approaches her in a strange way, asking if she and Sarah were friends. She tells him they went to the same school, and he becomes very interested in knowing if they had many classes together. Stanley, wanting to know everything, asks if they were very close friends and if she was nice in high school, but Jenny begins to answer that they weren't that close. She watches the man while he assumes Sarah must have been super popular in school. At the restaurant, it was obvious how Stanley had an interest in the young woman. And then, Jenny finally understood everything. She offers to help him with whatever he needs, but he gets extremely embarrassed, pretending he didn't know what she was talking about. Jenny walks up to him and says she promises she will help him win Sarah's heart. Stanley is very surprised. With a radiant expression, she asks him to promise to let her live there for 3 months, and she promises she will help him win Sarah's affection. A new day begins, and we see the imposing HU hotel chain. We see a well-organized closet, arranged with formal clothes. Stanley puts on a white shirt, getting ready for a new day. On his stomach, there is a large scar. What could have happened to him? Quickly going back to the past, Sarah is very frightened. Stanley had been wounded by someone, a wound so deep it cut through his suit jacket. He could barely see his hands covered in red stains. Back to the present, he buttons his shirt. Absent-minded, his thoughts are with Sarah. He remembers the conversation he had with Jenny in the basement, and he asked her how the young woman could help him get closer to Sarah, but the enigmatic girl only said she was capable. He remains silent, anxiously waiting for her answer. And then, determined, she says she will work on it during the weekend, and that she will do her best to help him. He was shocked by her courage, because she showed she didn't even know how she would succeed yet. Maybe she was just trying to secure the free stay. Believing he had nothing to lose, he puts a bit of hair mousse in his hand, and then applies it to his hair, slicking it back and leaving it very shiny. Optimistic, Stanley assumes that it wouldn't hurt to listen to some advice Jenny might give him. He closes the door with a bang. In his office, there is an elegant nameplate with his name. Stanley reads several tips on how to win a woman's affection, and he says with some irony that it looked like Jenny had worked really hard. However, to the young woman's surprise, he throws the pile of papers down, saying that those tips were generic and useless to him. He leans toward her, very arrogant, and says that it had been a waste of time because he already had many qualities. And then he strikes a pose, full of himself, as if he believed there was no woman in the world he couldn't seduce. Jenny found all of that a bit irritating. The man tells her that if that was really all she had, then he declares that they could not continue with the agreement she suggested, and since she was Sarah's former school friend, he had created very high expectations. Stanley says that he had been expecting something much more revealing, like the type of guy Sarah likes, or her hobbies, things she enjoyed, but it seemed like Jenny literally wrote anything just to get the deal. He asks if she had anything to say in her defense, but Jenny stays silent in the face of his direct confrontation. He checks the time on his watch and continues complaining that she didn't help him with anything, and that he had already felt from the start that it would be useless. Anyway, our protagonist becomes nervous listening to Stanley's rude words. She squeezes her own hands, trying to hide that she had been shaking for a while he asks her to leave his office. Suddenly, she stands up quickly with a more authoritative posture, which leaves him speechless. Jenny walks towards Stanley and inexplicably sits next to him without saying a single word. She reaches out her hand for something and grabs a delicate vase of flowers. Stanley, confused, asks what she was doing. Jenny pours a little water into her hand while the desperate man asks if she was going to throw water on him. He was her boss, in case she had forgotten. She holds the water in her hand for a few seconds and firmly holds Stanley so that he does not get up. Suddenly, she places the wet hand on the man's head. They stare at each other while Stanley asks what she thought she was doing. Jenny was messing up his hair, arguing that Sarah hated guys with too much mousse in their hair, especially slicked back. He claims he did not need her advice and grabs the young woman's hand firmly. Ignoring his protests, Jenny says she really thought he needed to change his hair and asks him to stay still for a bit. He shouts that she was ruining his hair. And then, with his hairstyle already undone and out of breath, Stanley uses his strength to immobilize Jenny, laying her on the sofa while holding her hand. Our protagonist does not give up and explains that since he had said she was useless, she was there trying to help him. He asks if she calls that help, and then he is caught by surprise when she says she could not let him kick her out of the hotel. Something about that catches his attention. Looking at her so close, Stanley seemed to finally notice the young woman's beauty. He remains silent for a few moments, and then a door opens. Someone enters, asking for a signature on a document. Sarah enters the office and immediately comes face to face with her boss and her intern friend on the sofa, apparently on top of each other. The two become very embarrassed. Sarah is completely paralyzed, not understanding what was happening there. 1 year ago at Hotel Sun, Stanley and his secretary Barney were spying on a competing hotel, and they noticed that although the directors had spent a lot of money there, the hotel was neither luxurious nor organized. The two agree that the owners did not seem to understand anything about the hotel industry. Stanley cheers up and convinces himself he shouldn't have worried, and Barney tells him that he thought Stanley didn't sleep the night before because he was nervous. But the man vehemently denies it, and his secretary just agrees. Then something catches Stanley's attention. Down the hall of the hotel, they hear a little child crying. Suddenly, a little boy jumps into his arms, clutching his suit jacket tightly, while a young red-haired woman observes in silence. The young woman is Sarah. Stanley tries to explain himself, saying he didn't mean any harm. The man tries to explain to her that the little boy must have been separated from his parents, and not knowing the room number, he must have been terrified. Sarah kneels down and lets out a light laugh. That surprises Stanley. She says he didn't need to explain. After all, if he were a bad person, he wouldn't be holding that little boy so delicately. She gives him a friendly smile. That gesture left Stanley speechless, and he blushed slightly. She gently comforts the child and lets him know that his parents would be back soon. It was noticeable how delicate the young woman was in handling that situation. Stanley realizes that he had always wanted someone to say such comforting words to him. And then, in that moment, he knew she would be his true love. And because of that, how could such a disaster be happening right in front of Sarah? All that time she was there watching, clearly in shock. Blushing intensely, she apologizes to both of them and says she didn't mean to interrupt. She reaches for the doorknob, getting ready to leave. But immediately, like a flash, Stanley shuts the door in front of her, preventing the young woman from leaving. He begs her to please allow him to explain. The man starts saying that it was a misunderstanding. Out of nowhere, he notices something important. Sarah looked so beautiful when she was completely flushed. She timidly tells her boss that he didn't need to explain anything to her. Her cheeks were very red with embarrassment, but there was something there. Stanley wonders why she seemed so shaken by that scene. Jenny silently stared at them. She could swear that the CEO was just a playboy. Because of that, she was going to pretend to help him win her friend just to buy time while living there. However, Stanley really did seem to be deeply in love with Sarah. He looked at her affectionately. However, the two had forgotten for a moment that they were being watched by Jenny, who was still sitting on the sofa. That situation was extremely embarrassing. All Jenny wanted most was to escape from there. Meanwhile, Stanley had managed to stop Sarah from leaving the office, but he was lost trying to find words to explain the situation. What she saw when she walked in must have looked very similar to a forbidden movie. After all, how could he explain something of that magnitude? From any angle, that situation was absurd and strange. He couldn't just say he was trying to seduce her. He looked furiously at Jenny, mentally blaming her for ruining everything. Not really understanding, she wonders why he was looking at her like that. Believing he was asking for help, she gets up from the sofa, ready to invent a plausible excuse. She calls out to Sarah, and the man fears what else she might say. He was still shocked that she had messed up his hair. The two exchange glances, and Stanley hopes she won't do anything else weird. Jenny tells her friend that she and Stanley had a little disagreement. She would even explain, but it was a bit personal, though she guaranteed it was nothing serious. After all, Mr. Stanley was very stubborn. He looks irritated at her, and she gives him a funny look back. Sarah observes the strange interaction between them without saying anything. Then she confesses that she hadn't realized how close the two were, close enough to talk about very personal matters. Stanley and Jenny stare at each other. You could even see how much they liked each other, in an ironic way. They both tell Sarah they weren't that close. The two needed to think of something quickly, because Sarah would be shocked if Stanley did something like that with someone he barely knew, and he would be labeled a pervert forever. However, if he said they were close, new questions would arise, putting both of them in danger. It would be lies, and more lies. While Stanley stands still, lost in his thoughts, Jenny looks at him in silence. And then, the young woman has an idea. At that moment, Stanley seemed determined to tell Sarah the truth. He would probably feel pathetic, but it seemed like the best path. Before he could say anything, Jenny interrupts him, saying that they were so close that he was like an older brother to her. Stanley becomes petrified, even getting chills at Jenny's boldness. Jenny builds the lie further, saying their families were very close, hoping he would go along with the plan. Reluctantly, Stanley says their families were indeed very close, and that as the young woman had said, they had a small misunderstanding. Sarah is surprised. Discreetly, the young woman blushes. Stanley notices that her shy look is the same as before. He wonders, what could be going on? Remembering that she still had work to do, Sarah says goodbye and leaves them alone again. As she leaves, she closes the door behind her. The young woman seemed lost in her thoughts. Her expression is calm and indecipherable. Sometime later, one of the employees calls Jenny, informing her that the boss would like to speak with her. As always, rumors spread very quickly, and some employees gossip behind Jenny's back, wondering what the boss of the company could possibly want with an intern. Stanley usually didn't even know how many interns existed in the hotel. She listens carefully as some women assume that Jenny must be super rich and that they should stay on her good side. As she walks away, Sarah thinks about her friend's words, that she and Stanley were like siblings. The young woman shows a serious expression while walking. Side by side, Jenny and Stanley stare at the closed office doors. Finally, our protagonist breaks the silence and declares that she didn't want any of that to happen, knowing she had crossed some lines, but asks him please not to fire her or kick her out. She tells him that she knew she shouldn't have said they were friends. But for heaven's sake, how are they supposed to explain that situation? Instead of saying they were very close friends, it was better to say they were just friends, right? Stanley was so shaken that he didn't hear a word. Suddenly, he tells the young woman that he thinks Sarah is… And Jenny completes, disappointed, disgusted, upset with him? That annoys the CEO, and he replies that it wasn't any of those things. He remembers how shy she became during that embarrassing moment and comes to a conclusion. He thinks Sarah is jealous. His conclusion leaves Jenny very surprised. Finally, he asks the young woman to do him a favor. If she helps him, she can live there for as long as she wants. Jealousy is the feeling we have when we see the person we love in love with someone else. So, someone can only be jealous if they are really interested in that person. A couple laughs happily while looking at photos on the guy's phone. Suddenly, a notification pops up from My Love Emily. The girl quickly remembers that Emily was one of her boyfriend's coworkers. Caught red-handed, the boy tries to smooth the situation, giving a super weird laugh. His girlfriend, worried, asks, "What is wrong with him?" Clearly he lies, saying that Emily was his mother's name. The young woman apologizes for the misunderstanding and even says it was a beautiful name. The young man tries to divert the situation, saying that she looked super cute when she got jealous of him. From afar, Stanley watches them in silence. The man clearly also didn't believe that ridiculous excuse. The truth was that a tiny bit of jealousy could reveal someone's true feelings for a person. Remembering what happened with Sarah, Stanley realizes that she was showing a little jealousy, which probably meant she must be interested in him. While the couple continues laughing distractedly, Jenny also watches them without displaying any reaction. The two were in a cafe restaurant, not very crowded but apparently stylish. On the table, there were some small toasts and a sauce. In the CEO's elegant car, she wonders how she got herself into that situation. He had driven for an entire hour just to get there. She reminds him that they were in a cafe restaurant in the middle of nowhere. Stanley explains that he wanted more privacy, and if they ate near the hotel, they could run into someone they knew. Besides, the place seemed very nice and he was hungry. Seeing the place almost empty, Jenny says she hopes they don't run into anyone there. Serving herself a little bread, she asks if he also heard about the rumors. Annoyed, he asks her, "What rumors? Were people spreading some rumor about him?" Jenny gets a little embarrassed, trying to explain the situation. Avoiding eye contact, she tries to say that maybe he already knew. But he interrupts her, saying no, he had no idea what she was talking about. Eating a small piece of bread, she says that people called him, and he asks her to just say it already. Without any shame, Jenny says out loud that people said he was a huge playboy. And apparently, the few people in the restaurant heard everything. The annoying couple at the next table starts gossiping about how Stanley really did look like a playboy. Stanley tries to compose himself, wishing Sarah hadn't heard those rumors, and tells Jenny that he was not a playboy at all. Then the young woman surprises him by saying she knew a very famous story about his love life, leaving him in shock. It was a story that happened some time ago. A blonde young woman went to the reception desk asking to see Stanley, but the receptionist told her that Mr. Kwan was on a business trip. The blonde girl does not accept that answer, claiming that he was just trying to avoid her and that she demanded to see him once and for all. The receptionist asked the young woman to calm down because she didn't want to call hotel security. The blonde gets even more irritated, asking if the receptionist knew who she was. The receptionist explains that it didn't matter who she was. She didn't have the right to mistreat the staff, and that as soon as Mr. Kwan arrived, she would be contacted. The blonde girl shouts for everyone to hear that she was pregnant with Stanley. That production was an exclusive offering from Squarebucks Coffee. Jenny tells him that the scene was so absurd it looked like a Korean drama. Stanley is shocked because that woman had caused him a lot of trouble, and it was all a huge lie. Our protagonist cannot feel empathy for the man's drama, and that story sounded like a problem he brought upon himself. He asks her not to look at him like that, as if he were pathetic. Jenny swears she didn't think that about him, although now he is sure she did. The two stare at each other for a few moments, and the girl's expression showed that he was right. She did consider him a playboy. Before he could explain the rumors to her, their meals arrived. Jenny gently thanks the waiter, shifting to a very sweet tone, very different from how harsh she normally treats Stanley. The man then gives up explaining, thinking he owed her no justification anyway, and then notices how happy she looked just staring at the food. He thinks that the two of them were only looking after their own interests with that deal, so he didn't need to worry. While cutting his steak, he admits that he thinks Sarah is jealous of them. Jenny listens as the man asks her for a favor that requires a little bit of acting. Then he asks if she was really listening. Jenny calmly eats her noodles. Finishing her food, she places her hands on the table and delicately wipes her face before speaking. The young woman asks him if she understood correctly. His plan was to make Sarah jealous. Stanley, a little embarrassed, admits that yes. She says they didn't have to come all the way there to talk about it. They could have discussed it in his office. Next, Stanley begins to say something, but changes his mind. Soon he declares that they needed to come up with an infallible plan. After all, he was a 31-year-old man trying to make the girl he liked jealous. Sounding more optimistic, Jenny lets out a small giggle. Interested in his ideas, she asks how he planned to make Sarah jealous. The annoying couple freezes. The waiter holding the tray freezes too, and even Stanley is stunned by what he is seeing. Jenny, with a very robotic posture, offers to feed him using a fork. The man becomes extremely uncomfortable with her terrible acting and asks the young woman what she was doing. Then Jenny explains she had seen that on TV and asks if that wasn't the type of thing he wanted her to do to make Sarah jealous. He lets out a big sigh and asks her to be a bit more discreet because they could not behave like that at the hotel or anywhere else. Our protagonist does not seem to understand subtleties very well, so the man explains to her that sometimes when we like someone, we try to send small signals. Jenny is speechless. Maybe that was something very new to her. Even without fully understanding, she asks him to continue. Suddenly, Stanley stands up. He walks beside the table and positions himself next to the young woman without saying a word. Jenny looks at him, a little confused. She asks if he wanted revenge because she messed up his hair the other day. Stanley answers that she has no idea what he is about to do. The man asks that when she sees him talking to Sarah, Jenny should walk up to him and grab his arm playfully. He extends his arm to her, suggesting they rehearse right there. So she grabs his arm forcefully, and then asks, "Like this?" He pulls his arm back and asks her not to grab him with so much brutality. Jenny becomes curious while he asks that they try an alternative. Stanley approaches and gently touches the young woman's shoulder, and then his hand slowly glides down her arm. He explains that she should hold his arm in a delicate way, and then she should look into his eyes. Sometime later at Hotel Hiyu, Stanley thinks he might be being childish by using someone to win the affection of the woman he liked. There in the luxurious hotel hallway, Stanley and Sarah were talking peacefully. While the young woman moved her feet, he thought about how bad he felt threatening to take away the place where Jenny was living. Jenny approaches while Stanley tells the young woman that she seemed very busy organizing that night's event. She answers that she was trying very hard since it was her first corporate event. Suddenly, Jenny touches his shoulder and glides her hand delicately down his arm. Briefly interrupting the conversation between Sarah and Stanley, she greets her boss good morning while holding his arm. Stanley gives her a smile, and Jenny sweetly returns a friendly smile. Sarah is perplexed watching that interaction between the two. All Stanley wants most is to win Sarah's heart. Back at the cafe restaurant, then Jenny says to him that she is finally understanding what he meant. She asks if what she needs to do is grab his arm and act in a way that would make Sarah jealous. Correct? He says that she should be much more than just friendly with him. Stanley asks if she has ever had boyfriends in the past. Jenny doesn't understand the reason for that question, and he explains that before two people start dating, there is that period of flirting. Jenny finally reveals that she had never gone through that. Apparently, the young woman had never dated in her entire life. But our protagonist confesses that she was always too busy to date. As for him, despite being a very busy businessman, he was constantly going in and out of relationships. Because of that, she says she didn't really understand his strategies. Jenny was the opposite of a romantic person and a terrible actress. Stanley is satisfied that she followed the plan, and Jenny gives him her best fake smile. Now, he knew his next step would be to make Sarah jealous. The young woman looks at him without saying anything. After listening to Jenny greet him good morning, she gives a shy smile back. Sarah gives her friend a radiant smile. Stanley wonders why she was not showing jealousy. Our protagonist knew very well that her mission now was to flirt with the boss to make her friend jealous and guarantee her housing. Interrupting the two, Sarah hands him a tablet, explaining that one of their most demanding clients would like to schedule a tour in Seoul, and she would really like his opinion on the places. Seeing that his plan was working, Stanley quickly pulls his arm away from Jenny. The young woman looks at him in silence. They discuss several tour options, and Stanley admits how happy he is to have taken Sarah away from Hotel Sun, and Sarah says she is very happy to work with them. In that moment, Jenny was certain they had forgotten she was even there. Stanley begins to remember all the times he tried to ask Sarah out, but the young woman always found a way to escape him. Even if he came with theater tickets, she always had plans with a friend. If he offered to help her with a stack of papers, she refused, saying they weren't that heavy. That constant rejection always broke the man's heart, because to him, Sarah was usually very cold. While Sarah and Stanley talk, the only thing Jenny wants is the food. Stanley, seeing the young woman smiling so brightly at him, imagines that she must have certainly grown fond of him. He becomes convinced, assuming that his infallible plan is working. On the other hand, Jenny does not seem to be understanding very well. He gives her a look of a satisfied client, thinking they are doing a great job. Jenny wonders why he was smiling at her like that. Did he want her to do something more? Speaking softly, she calls Stanley's attention and asks if he wanted her to flirt even more with him. Jenny positions herself between the two, and Sarah freezes upon seeing a new moment of intimacy between her friend and her boss. Stanley stares at Jenny, not really understanding what was going on. He looks at her confused, while the young woman proceeds to fix his tie right in front of Sarah. Jenny whispers, asking if he was satisfied, and he whispers back asking what she was talking about. He thinks their plan is already going very well, and something grabs his attention. In that moment, Sarah seemed to be watching Jenny with an upset expression. He has a flashback of the tragic day when he believed Sarah had stopped liking him. But back in the present, he now believes that wasn't true. Stanley assumes that she still likes him enough to feel jealous. Suddenly, Jenny calls him again, claiming she found something on his shirt. And then, with a big smile, she says that he looked very handsome in those colors. That situation was extremely awkward. Annoyed, he asks what she was doing. Jenny, very clumsy, says she must have really messed up. He whispers, asking her to stop improvising. Sarah watches the two silently. Her look shifts to Jenny for a few moments. In the hotel hallways, up on the 21st floor, Barney and Stanley decide where they will have lunch. Barney says he is sick of eating in the hotel cafeteria, and right away, Stanley says they will eat there anyway. He is determined to know whether his plan is working, and by going there, he has a chance of running into Sarah. He is willing to do anything to win her heart. Arriving at the HU hotel cafeteria, in a small bowl there is a huge mountain of rice. Stanley feels a bit disappointed to see that the person there is Jenny and not Sarah. The mountain of rice on the intern's tray seems to shock everyone in the cafeteria. He wonders how she could eat that much rice. Barney replies that he understands her, because the hotel bowls were too small. He himself also carried a mountain of rice on his tray. Stanley watches Jenny sit down to have lunch alone and wonders if the girl didn't have any other friends. Where was Sarah? Jenny opens a book. The young woman reads a book about the economy of Korea while she eats. Stanley and Barney are sitting at a nearby table, staring at the young woman. He is in shock. Jenny may have a beautiful face, but the way the young woman devoured her food was completely inelegant. Apparently, she was like a swan. On the surface, graceful and elegant, but underneath the water, desperately flapping her limbs not to drown. They lock eyes while she closes a lunchbox filled with food taken from the cafeteria. Without breaking eye contact, she places the lunchbox inside a bag. Stanley realizes that other people in the cafeteria had noticed the same thing, and they start gossiping about Jenny. He becomes very bothered hearing other female employees talking about her, until he notices that they weren't saying bad things. The young women were talking about how she managed to read a book while eating. Another one replies that she never reads books, and that the book Jenny was reading could even serve as a pillow. Stanley looks bewildered at Jenny because, according to the girls, she was the elegant intern who liked to read. By late afternoon, in the women's locker room, Jenny takes the opportunity to take a relaxing shower. She gracefully dries her hair, while other girls find it peculiar. On the way out, two young women comment about how Jenny seemed to take several showers. One day, one of them counted almost 10 times. Stanley overhears the girls' conversation, and one of them comments she had never used the employee shower in her life. He starts to get nervous. As the young women walk away, Stanley spots Jenny and signals for her to come closer. Stanley becomes annoyed, thinking, does Jenny not care that people might discover she lives there? He had noticed one detail about the girl. She was always very well perfumed and well groomed, and then realizes he was thinking about her. Stanley observes her in silence, wondering how an intern could care so much about hygiene. Later on, at Hotel HU, Stanley comments to Barney that the hotel needs a lot of renovations. The man in the gray suit agrees, explaining that the employee areas need a lot of attention. The boss asks him to schedule the renovations as soon as possible, as long as they don't disturb the guests. Barney takes the opportunity to remind him of an important detail. He tells Stanley that he should have left work 35 minutes ago, and then Stanley tells him to go home already. However, when Stanley tries to call him to go out for dinner together, the secretary is already leaving. Stanley says goodbye, asking what was so great about going home. He realizes that he hasn't seen Sarah all day and wants to find a way to run into her in the hallways. Suddenly, Jenny rushes by like a shadow right in front of him. The man even pulls back his shoulders from the scare. Once again, that girl frightens him. She walks toward the door that leads to the basement and quickly enters. Stanley can't accept that he keeps running into that strange girl instead of the love of his life, Sarah. He wonders how she can just enter the basement while so many people are around. Maybe she should be more discreet. Stanley hears some girls wondering why Jenny goes to the basement so much, and he starts to get worried. The girls get distracted and change the subject, claiming the young woman must have a lot of work to do down there and remembering how they also carried a lot of items when they were interns. The man wonders what is going on. He finds it so strange how no one finds that strange. What other people saw was a dedicated intern who read during lunch, but Stanley saw her secretly stealing food from the cafeteria. People saw her as a woman with perfect hygiene and self-care, but he knew she took several showers because there was no shower in the basement. Some could even think she was being a diligent professional, but he knew the truth, that she was going to her hidden refuge in the hotel basement. At that moment, Stanley was certain of how a little perspective really changes how we perceive people. Despite the peculiar situation, Jenny seemed very content living in the hotel. That night, some female employees were carrying some boxes filled with files. Meanwhile, in the basement, Jenny, wrapped in her blankets, was hidden between the boxes, worried that the other girls might find her there. Finally, the young woman falls into a deep sleep. A new day begins, and the HU hotel starts its activities. Stanley approaches Jenny while the young woman grabs breakfast. The man begins discreetly fiddling inside his suit pocket. Apparently, he had a small surprise for her, a peace offering she would not be able to refuse. She turns toward him with her mouth full of food. On her plate, he sees several leftover snack packages from a hotel event. He is shocked, wondering if she had eaten all of that by herself. Jenny asks for a moment so she can finish eating the cookie. And now, with an attentive and delicate expression, she asks how she could help him. The young woman stares at his closed fist, not really understanding what he was offering. Stanley, seeing her confused expression, tells her he would like to give her something. He delicately hands her something, explaining that he requested the basement from management for his personal use. There, in Jenny's hand, was the basement key. Our protagonist is very surprised by such a subtle gift, and with curiosity, her gaze turns to Stanley. The boss begins to say something, and she is still speechless. He regrets having yelled at her and having been so rude to her at first. Somehow, she seems to have understood. And finally, Jenny gives an optimistic smile. She sweetly thanks him for the key and says she will make the best use possible of the space. Next, Stanley begins to tell her that he will personally speak to the cafeteria staff about... Before he could finish the sentence, she interrupts him, shouting his name, leaving him completely confused. Jenny approaches him and starts caressing his arm while saying random things, thanking him for other things that didn't even make sense. The man becomes very uncomfortable with her sudden change of behavior, unable to understand what was happening, and then Jenny warns him that Sarah was coming. Finally, he understands. Jenny is pleased with the timing of her plan, and Stanley stares at Sarah, who had just arrived at the hotel. She looked stunning with her hair done, wearing a beautiful violet outfit. Jenny gives a satisfied smile. Whispering, the young woman tells him that she will take it from there. She smiles and asks him to consider her actions as her rent payment. Stanley remains silent, unable to imagine what she will do next. Somehow, Jenny's smile stirred something inside him. He remembers the little prank she played before, and that makes him slightly nervous, but not in a bad way. Discreetly, he asks her to stop improvising. Giving small pats on Stanley's shoulder, she thanks him once again, while Sarah stands watching the two. Jenny gives him a wink and offers to buy him a coffee as thanks. Subtly, she grabs his arm, just like they planned. Stanley feels uncomfortable with that because he realizes that constant actions like that wouldn't make Sarah jealous. They would make her furious. Jenny, unable to get out of character, asks if he would like an ultra-delicious coffee. He whispers, begging her to stop doing that. He is worried that Sarah's interest in him might disappear. Surprising the two, Sarah asks if she could join them for coffee. The red-haired girl confesses that she actually really needed some caffeine. Stanley's heart can barely stay inside his chest. Was she jealous of him? She gets a little shy and asks if it wouldn't be a problem to join them. Stanley is beyond happy with that and says it would be wonderful to have her with them. However, as they were leaving, Stanley's phone started vibrating in his pocket. He sees several alarming messages, lamenting the terrible timing. Stanley, with urgency, apologizes to the girls and says he has to leave quickly to resolve some matters. He starts to leave, talking on the phone, and Sarah is left alone with Jenny. Jenny continues to feel satisfied now that the plan seems to be working, but Sarah seems worried about something else while looking at her friend. The red-haired young woman calls her colleague's attention, who turns to her immediately. Sarah asks if they could talk in private. Jenny goes quiet, unable to guess what her colleague wanted to talk about. Getting straight to the point, Sarah says that Jenny shouldn't expose her relationship with Mr. Kwan so much. She takes a sip of coffee, seeming to reflect on the words she had just said. Jenny doesn't say it, but thinks that the one exposing her feelings about Mr. Kwan was actually Sarah. Our protagonist can't help herself and lets out a little chuckle, wondering if her friend might be jealous of the boss, which would mean the plan might be working. There at the cafeteria, Sarah says that people would start gossiping. I mean, the two of them worked in a hotel, which was the perfect place for weird rumors to spread quickly through the hallways. The red-haired young woman tries to talk to her colleague, explaining that Jenny hadn't done anything wrong, but others might not see it that way. After all, Jenny was still only an intern. Too much attention could be harmful for her, says Sarah. Jenny analyzes her colleague, who tells her that such behavior could prevent her from getting a promotion. But what our protagonist hears is that Sarah wants Jenny to stay away from Stanley. The black-haired young woman becomes excited, thinking that after all that acting, Sarah really did have feelings for Stanley, and she felt like a shrimp squeezed between two whales. Despite the rough beginning, Jenny was feeling happy for Stanley, who might finally have his feelings reciprocated, because he truly seemed to genuinely like Sarah. Now, all she wanted was to step away from that whole strategy. Sarah does not drop the topic and says that people love to gossip, and they were even gossiping in the hallways that Jenny was too old to be an intern. Despite starting later, to her, Jenny worked incredibly well. Jenny listens attentively while Sarah tries to advise her as a friend, saying that if she didn't reach a high position there at the hotel, she could have trouble finding a job elsewhere. Our protagonist holds her coffee cup while thinking about Sarah's words. Leaving Sarah shocked, Jenny replies that her relationship with Mr. Kwan was exactly what could help her get hired permanently. Jenny reinforces that they were just good friends. Sarah does not seem to believe those words very much, and finally lets out a small laugh. Leaning forward, Sarah says that Jenny had not changed at all, but the young woman does not seem to know what she is talking about. Then, in a malicious tone, Sarah says that Jenny still seemed very confident even after her father's business went bankrupt. Jenny's expression becomes harsher and serious as she stares at Sarah in silence. Our protagonist asks herself why Sarah would say something like that. Jenny's gaze becomes darker and deeper after her colleague's provocation. Sarah notices a subtle change in the young woman. Trying to fix the situation, Sarah says she was just trying to protect her from suffering from rumors spread by others, and that she had no intention of crossing any boundaries. To Sarah's surprise, Jenny thanks her for the advice and firmly tells her colleague that Mr. Kwan would have nothing to do with a future promotion. She would have nothing to worry about as long as she did her job well. Resolute in her argument, Jenny takes a long sip of coffee. Sarah asks if she was sure about what she was saying. Far from there, in the hotel lobby, a literary event was being held. The famous French author Jean-Pierre, author of A Silent Night Walk, would be arriving at the HU Hotel to present his book. Sarah talks to someone on the phone, asking the person, "What do you mean you can't contact them?" She insists they keep trying, while Jenny and another employee watch her, worried. A young woman with light brown hair asks Sarah if they managed to contact the guests in room 1305. With a mix of sadness and worry, Sarah replies that they have not. Sarah seems very distressed, not knowing what to do in that situation. Although the other coworker is extremely nervous, Jenny maintains a calm expression. Quickly, Stanley and Barney arrive, worried when they see the girls apparently trying to fix a problem. The young women greet him, bowing out of respect for him. Stanley and Jenny greet each other with a discreet nod. It was not a time for jokes. Everyone there falls silent, worried about the missing guests. Sarah notices something while lost in thought. Finally, Stanley asks, what was going on? Sarah explains to him that an employee accidentally sent Mr. Pierre's clothes to the wrong room, and although they tried to contact the guests, they were not answering. Stanley says they could send new clothes to the author. Sarah confesses that among the clothes was a tailored suit that the author himself brought for the event, and that it had been sent to the laundry. The author was a very particular man. They did not know if he would accept wearing other clothes. Stanley did not know what to do in such a complicated situation. Finally, he asked, who had made the mistake? Sarah begins to explain, but the coworker with light brown hair gives her a somewhat threatening look. The same young woman turns to Stanley and says that it was Jenny who sent the clothes by mistake. However, hours earlier, the one who had the suit was the young woman with light brown hair herself. She was irritated about having to do that kind of task because she already had too many responsibilities during the event. On top of her other obligations, she would have to walk across the entire hotel to deliver that suit. Suddenly, she got an idea. Right in front of her, Jenny was pulling some books out of a box. Interrupting her main task, the young woman asked Jenny to take the suit to room 1305. Jenny tries to confirm whether that room number was correct, but her colleague is very impatient and says she doesn't want to repeat herself to her. The young woman constantly complains that there is too much work to be done and not enough staff available, and that all she had there were a few interns. Although she disliked the girl's comment, Jenny stayed silent. While taking the suit to room 1305, Jenny spots Sarah and Stanley. From a distance, Sarah watches her, but does not smile. Jenny keeps a serious and firm posture. Back to the present, Stanley and Sarah stare at each other. The young woman does not seem to have much to say in her own defense. Sarah explains that the suit should have been delivered to room 1405, not 1305. Jenny, hearing that, gives a threatening look to the colleague who had been rude to her. Jenny turns to Stanley and apologizes for the mistake. She promises that. Suddenly, Sarah interrupts her, claiming that it was her fault, sparing the colleague from blame but placing Jenny in a lower position. She explains to Stanley that the author's clothes were her responsibility because he had personally asked her to take them to the laundry. Sarah claims that Jenny was still just an intern and that it was understandable for her to have made that mistake. Jenny looks at her with silent anger. She remembers the conversation they had earlier while drinking coffee, during which Jenny commented that she would have nothing to worry about as long as she did her job well. Our protagonist also remembered Sarah's enigmatic expression during that conversation. Now, in the present, Sarah is asking Stanley to forgive Jenny for what happened. Stanley, as their boss, asks that they focus on one matter at a time and tells them to return to that subject later. Jenny remains silent, uncomfortable with the entire situation. Before the event begins, Stanley asks Barney to buy some French luxury suits. Suddenly, Sarah's phone begins vibrating, and she asks to be excused so she can answer the call. Jenny and Stanley watch her as she talks on the phone. She apparently had some good news. Relieved and radiant with joy, she turns toward them and says that they managed to reach the guests and that she will soon retrieve the suit. Stanley asks her to offer a bonus to the guests as thanks for their understanding and as an apology for bothering them. Jenny volunteers to go get the suit because she knows Sarah still has other event arrangements to handle. However, Stanley is very upset with everything that happened and asks that Sarah personally go retrieve the suit. He turns to Jenny and states that a hotel is much more than just rooms, and it is their obligation to make the guest's experience impeccable. In a very stern tone, he tells her to remember that even the smallest mistakes can cause great damage. Jenny is shocked because he had never spoken to her in that tone before. Humbly, she bows to him, lowering her head and accepting his words. She gently asks him to forgive her. However, Stanley is still very angry and does not answer her. Sarah is very surprised, thinking that since they were supposedly great friends, he would forgive her much faster. The red-haired young woman watches him attentively. And finally, her gaze turns to Jenny. Our protagonist is devastated because besides lying right in front of her, she was blamed for someone else's mistake. Maliciously, Sarah thinks that she no longer has anything to worry about regarding her. The literary event begins. The camera is already positioned to record the author's talk. It was a success. The interview with the French writer Jean-Pierre was almost coming to an end. Barney and Stanley chat in relief, and the boss reveals that everything went well thanks to Sarah's efforts, who organized everything carefully. Despite the hectic preparation, she managed to schedule a tour for the writer. Stanley feels proud for having taken her away from the competing hotel and placed her on his team. Barney, knowing the boss's intentions, claims that he had absolutely no bias. The boss gets irritated at the secretary's comments, and the secretary replies that his dream is to be fired. They turn around when they hear Jenny arriving with the author's bottled water. The light brown-haired girl snatches the bag from Jenny's hands, ordering her to take care of other event tasks. To him, Jenny looks very tired and a bit frightened. The young woman wipes sweat from her face, but it looks more like she was wiping away tears. Stanley looks at her, but for the moment remains silent. Barney, driven by curiosity, asks the boss what would happen if Jenny didn't show up at work tomorrow. The secretary thinks she must believe she ruined her opportunity to be hired permanently, especially because, according to him, she had seen the bad side of Stanley. The boss didn't seem to understand any of that. What did Barney mean by bad side? The secretary explains that he had made a very evil-looking face. Stanley asks him what was wrong with his face. Barney begins to explain. Stanley grows curious to hear him. The secretary explains that it was as if, to him, Jenny were a cockroach, or even a ghost. Barney explains that the boss had made a look of pure disgust toward the intern. The blonde man explains that because of that, maybe she won't even come back the next day. He justifies himself saying he felt really upset for her, because despite the mistake she made, it was something simple to resolve. The situation seemed worse than it was, and small incidents like that were common in hotels. Stanley explains that situations where mistakes happen always carry a lot of weight, and that is why new employees make mistakes, because they have not yet learned how to solve certain problems. Barney responds that in any case, the boss's expression had been terrifying. The boss wonders if he had really looked that scary. He turns and finds Jenny arranging some books in a box. In a flashback, he remembers how she had been willing to help him win over Sarah. Besides that, he admires the young woman's determination who was willing to do anything not to be kicked out of the hotel. And she even demonstrated quick thinking and was very smart when she told Sarah they were like siblings. During today's incident, she also showed her humility by being honest and apologizing very sincerely. Stanley vividly remembers her bowing humbly in front of him. He was not liking the situation one bit. Seeing her so fragile and vulnerable didn't feel right at all. Jenny carefully holds the author's books and places them inside the box. Suddenly, she hears Stanley praising Sarah for her excellent work. Far from Jenny, the two discuss details of the author's guided tour. Yeah, when those two were together, they really seemed made for each other. Jenny assumes that Stanley probably wouldn't need her help anymore. Our protagonist remembers the irritated expression he had thrown at her when talking about how small mistakes could ruin the guest experience. That moment really hurt her a lot. Besides that, why did she feel so embarrassed? On the other side, the reporter thanks the author for the interview. He tells her it was a pleasure. The recording team begins collecting the video equipment, quickly leaving the room. Suddenly, everyone's good mood is cut short by shouts coming from the people seated far away. Stanley wonders if Mr. Pierre was sure about that choice. The author, blonde and with a confident smile, assures him that he is. Jean-Pierre was the demanding French writer of many successful books. He turns to Jenny and tells the young woman that he would personally like the intern to be his guide during his stay in Seoul. Jenny is shocked by the writer's request. Stanley wonders what is happening there. He tries to understand the situation, but everything is far too confusing. Jean thanks Stanley for the hospitality, telling him that he had a beautiful hotel and great employees. The writer especially thanks Sarah for the attention and care. They begin standing up to leave. Stanley says that Sarah is the best employee he has. The next day, she would be his tour guide. The writer asks to see tomorrow's schedule. Sarah cheerfully hands him a notebook with the sightseeing spots she selected. Politely, he accepts the notebook. Meanwhile, one of the young female employees walks up to them carrying a small tray with coffee. The young woman serves them coffee while the writer reviews the schedule. However, something didn't seem right. Jean places the notebook on the table, telling both of them harshly that none of the choices interested him. That statement leaves Sarah and Stanley in shock, even scaring the young woman who brought the coffee. The writer bluntly says that there has been a change of plans and asks them to arrange an earlier flight for him. The two are shocked by the drastic change in attitude. Stanley, now assuming his CEO posture, tries to negotiate with him, claiming they would prepare a perfect tour for Jean. The writer seems very discouraged while drinking his coffee. Something had made him embarrassed, and the man asked them to drop the subject. Far from the table, some employees comment about Mr. Pierre's drastic change in attitude, about how he rejected all the tour suggestions and because of that, he wanted to cancel everything. Outraged by what happened, they comment that he didn't need to be so annoying, and that Sarah worked very hard to assemble that schedule, even though it wasn't part of her duties. That problem ended up putting Sarah in a very difficult position. After overhearing the coworkers' conversation, Jenny and Barney had an idea. While Jenny developed her idea, the secretary beside her was already preparing to look for flights for the next morning. At the same time, the two of them grabbed their phones and quickly began typing. Our protagonist typed furiously on her phone as if she were trying to buy some time. Jean delicately places his cup on the table, and right after, he informs them that he will go up to his room. Stanley continues trying to negotiate with him to find a solution. Suddenly, he is interrupted by Jenny speaking French, the writer's native language. Sarah is also shocked by that. And speaking impeccable French, Jenny suggests to the writer that he take a look at the sightseeing suggestion she had selected. Sarah becomes furious with her colleague's interference and angrily asks Jenny what she thought she was doing. Suddenly, the discussion is interrupted by the writer himself. Jean says that those sightseeing suggestions were perfect and that he would love to follow that itinerary tomorrow. Early in the morning at Hotel Hatyu, Stanley is greeted by two employees. He impatiently looks at his watch. Lost in his thoughts, he thinks Jenny is a very confusing girl. The night before, while Jean was being escorted to his room, they silently watched the author leave. Stanley, still worked up about everything that happened, turns to Jenny and asks what that had been. The young woman is a bit startled by his tone of voice. Dying of curiosity, he asks how she prepared that itinerary and why he chose her to be his guide. Nervously, Jenny begins to answer. The girl pauses for a moment, thinking of a response. Stanley stares at her, completely obsessed. The curiosity was killing him. Jenny tells him that she was just... Stanley looks at her, desperate to know the answer. And then she simply replies that it was a secret. Because of that response, he now had dark circles under his eyes from sleeping poorly, anxious to know what the secret was. He remembers having asked her several times, and all she answered was that the privacy of guests was a very valuable asset, which was basically the same line he had said that day. And Jenny had used his own words to protect herself. Stanley becomes very irritated, jumping from one conclusion to another. And what kind of tour would they even do? Finally, Jenny arrives at the front of the hotel and he turns to speak to her. She looks beautiful, with a cheerful expression and a radiant smile. Different from the clothes she usually wore, she was wearing a lovely white dress and a yellow coat. Stanley seems impressed by her beauty. She approaches, saying that Barney had called her and told her that the boss had to personally deliver something important to her. He even considers being childish and only giving her the gift in exchange for the secret, but he changes his mind, deciding to be a mature man. There's a first time for everything. He tells her that it wasn't anything big and begins searching one of the pockets of his blazer. With sparkling eyes, Jenny eagerly waited for whatever the gift was. He smiles, remembering that she made the same face when she was eating. He hands her a small object, and in that moment, their hands touch softly. Stanley happily tells her that she could spend the entire day with him. The him he referred to was one of the company's elegant cars. She looks amazed at that gift. And Stanley explains that since she had a driver's license, she could take Jean around the city comfortably. Her boss asks if she is satisfied or if she would prefer a limousine, but Jenny replies that everything was fine. Stanley wonders what she is talking about. Jenny explains that for the tour, she would use the subway because it would be difficult to park everywhere. And besides that, traffic jams could ruin the guest's experience. After all, was that the important gift? She confesses she was disappointed because she expected much more. Then Stanley surprises her by saying there was something else. The man shows her a black card, declaring that she could use it as much as she wanted. Jenny is shocked. That was a very exclusive card that only the wealthiest people had access to. That gift was extremely important to her. Now, he decides to have a little fun with her before giving her the card. He asks what the secret she's hiding is. Jenny gets a bit confused. Waving the card in front of her, he says he wants to know the secret and how she gained the guest's trust. In exchange for the secret, Jenny asks him for a favor. With a friendly smile, the protagonist says it was a very difficult favor, even for a man like him. Barney says he's relieved that Mr. Pierre wasn't on that plane. In his chair, Stanley looks at the clouds through the office window. A moment of silence settles between the two, because the boss was still very shocked by the recent events. He tells the secretary that he witnessed something incredible that day. Teasing the boss, Barney asks if it was the dark circles under his eyes talking. Irritated, Stanley says he didn't look that bad. He begins to say that earlier that day. Barney grows curious to know what it was about. That morning, in front of the hotel, Jenny confesses that she had an idea that would make Mr. Pierre very happy. Would Stanley be able to help her? The boss says he would think about it, and asks if it was something that their precious guest... He cuts himself off while clearing his throat, realizing he was repeating the girl's words. Finally, he says that if it's something Mr. Pierre really wants, he will certainly try. Hearing a very cheerful bonjour, the two turn around at the same time. And then, a very attractive young man walks out of the hotel lobby toward them. Who could that blonde guy be? Jenny and Stanley stare at him, completely shocked. The man greets them with another good morning in French. That guy was Mr. Pierre. In an attempt to appear as a serious and respected writer, he usually wore a beard and glasses, hiding his delicate face and his charming green eyes. How could he only be 31 years old? Pulling Jenny closer to him, he hurries away so they can start the tour together. Stanley, still in shock, watches the two leave for the city tour. Now, in the present moment, Stanley confesses to Barney that he never imagined Jean would be so attractive. Even more surprising, the two were the same age. Barney asks if the boss is intimidated because Mr. Pierre is more handsome than him. Laughing, Barney says that the world is a very big place. Annoyed, Stanley asks him what exactly he was trying to imply. After all, Stanley was only trying to say that the writer looked like a completely different person. Barney simply responds, sure. Then Stanley changes the subject and asks the secretary if he knows the famous actress Susie Lin. Barney lights up just from hearing her name. The blonde man asks the boss if he is dating the actress now. Please, tell him everything. Stanley yells that it is nothing like that. Barney tells him he shouldn't get irritated with him. After all, his boss had already done so many improbable things. Irritated by the secretary's boldness, he even cracks his knuckles. He takes a deep breath and begins to explain that Susie Lin, the famous actress and host of the TV show Waiting for You, started her career very early. And Barney completes by saying that despite her age, she had already won every award in her category. The show, Waiting for You, didn't gain much popularity due to high competition, but it apparently had a very special niche of fans, earning very high ratings. Changing the subject again, Barney asks the boss what is going on between Jenny and him. Stanley is shocked because that question came out of nowhere. The secretary reveals that he saw the two whispering about Mr. Pierre yesterday, and that today the boss gave her the keys to the company car. Stanley is speechless. He remembers the compromising situation, catching Jenny changing clothes in the basement. Stanley can't simply tell Barney everything. On top of that, there was her promise to help him with Sarah. He lets out a long sigh, trying to find a way to work around the situation. Stanley knew very well how curious the secretary was. What could he tell him? Then, Barney surprises him again by saying that he thinks nothing is going on between them, since the boss doesn't even have her phone number. The young man tells the boss that she is an impressive woman. With a small smile, he says how the girl is extremely confident, even after Stanley scolded her in front of everyone. The truth was that Barney actually really liked her. Those words leave Stanley even more shocked. The boss stands up, asking him why he was blushing. So Barney confesses that as soon as she becomes a full employee, he would love to work with her. After all, she learns fast and could become an excellent secretary. Stanley feels relieved hearing that. Returning to the previous topic, Barney asks why he had asked about the actress. The boss replies that her new movie is premiering today. Barney checks his phone and confirms the information. There are screenings at 4 p.m. and again at 7 p.m. Stanley kindly asks if he could arrange tickets for the 4 p.m. show, since Mr. Pierre's flight would be only later that night. The CEO says with an excited smile that he just knew Barney would manage to get the tickets. Barney, extremely competent, says he doesn't need luck, but asks him who the tickets are for. Stanley, with an even bigger smile, reveals that he knew someone who was a big fan. In the afternoon, at the CGB cinema, the lights were all on, illuminating the elegant cinema sign. Some girls chatted while eating popcorn, and Jenny was impressed that Stanley had managed to get the tickets. He gives a smug smile and says it was easy. Jenny notices his attitude and asks him to thank Barney later. Stanley gets embarrassed because he wanted to take the credit for the tickets, but he recognizes that his secretary had really done an excellent job. He asks how the tour went. Jenny gives a thumbs up because it seemed to have been very positive. The theme of the guided tour was to visit all the most famous places from the drama series, according to Mr. Pierre's wishes. They visited a cafe where Ms. Lin had cried after having her heart broken. Then they went to a food truck where Ms. Lin had also cried after having her heart broken again. And they literally visited every place where the actress had cried and had her heart broken by someone in the series. To Jenny, it was clear the actress was committed to crying a lot. Stanley acknowledges that Jenny had worked very hard that day. Now finally, Stanley understands why he rejected the first tour suggestion. To maintain the image of a respected author, he didn't want to request locations related to the Korean drama series. So in the end, the tour suggested by Sarah did not include anything that truly interested him. Jenny says that's exactly what happened. Stanley asks how Jenny had that information. She tries to explain that she just picked up on the hint, but her boss doesn't seem to believe it. Our protagonist explains that during a break in the interview, she overheard him talking in French with the interpreter, and he mentioned that he was a big fan of the Korean series. Apparently, Jenny knew some French and understood what he wanted. The author was completely in love with the famous actress Suzy Lin. Jenny explains that she saw him blushing when talking about the young woman and decided to bet on that. Stanley is incredulous and asks what she would have done if she had been wrong, to which she immediately replies by asking, "And what if I was right?" since her guess had been correct. She explains to the boss that she took the risk because she was very confident she was right. Otherwise, she would have been extremely embarrassed. But she did everything to make sure the author would have good memories of Korea. The young woman tells the CEO that even a simple good memory can change someone's life. Stanley watches her with interest as he absorbs her words. He gives a smile, and right after, he says only, "Good job, Jenny." Reinforcing the compliment, he says she did very well on that assignment. The CEO seemed very happy with the result. Jenny is speechless for a few moments after such praise. That had been the first time Stanley had ever called her by her name. A few moments later, Stanley asks her where Mr. Pierre was. The young woman tells him that he had gone to the restroom a while ago, and that he must be beautifying himself. Stanley asks her if she is sure they are the same person. Jenny laughs, saying that transformation is the power of love. He listens attentively as she comments that a person is capable of anything when they are in love. The man smiles, agreeing with her. Then Jenny asks him not to worry because she was sure things would work out between Sarah and him. She was sure he truly liked their coworker. As she closes her purse with a few clicks, she confides that she thinks Sarah feels something for him too. But Jenny cannot say with certainty because the coworker has not admitted it yet. Finally, she fastens the purse. Jenny was optimistic that Sarah would return his feelings. For some reason, Stanley is completely surprised, as if for a moment Sarah had slipped away from his mind. He smiles in gratitude. Our protagonist seemed very happy with everything she was managing to accomplish. Suddenly, someone calls out to Stanley. A very beautiful woman wearing expensive and elegant clothes and carrying a gorgeous luxury purse waves to Stanley, asking how long it had been since they last saw each other. She says he looked as handsome as ever. Behind her, many people admire her beauty, commenting on how famous she was and how everyone loved her work. Stanley becomes a bit embarrassed to run into her there, and behind them, people start making very indiscreet comments, asking who he was. The woman laughs, saying she never imagined she would find him there, because in the past, the CEO always claimed to be too busy to go to the movies with her. Playfully, she leans toward him, suggesting that now he must have a lot of free time on his hands. Quickly, he steps away from her advance, saying that he was already accompanied. And then, he turns toward Jenny, who was staring at the woman completely mesmerized by her beauty. The elegant woman asks Stanley if that young girl was his new girlfriend. They are caught by surprise for a few moments. The woman coldly analyzes Jenny, a delicate but ordinary face, a generic bag with no brand, simple shoes bought from a department store. She gives a malicious smile and rudely says that Stanley, CEO of hotels, could find something much better. Inside the cinema, a romantic couple gets distracted before the movie begins. In the row right in front of them, Jean-Pierre, the writer, happily takes selfies. Jenny grabs some popcorn to eat. Between Stanley and Jenny, there is an awkward silence, but fortunately the writer was so happy after the tour that he didn't even notice. While eating her popcorn, Jenny coldly comments that she didn't know Stanley would join them to watch the movie. He explains that he thought it wouldn't be a problem, since Barney bought 3 tickets, and he hadn't gone to the cinema in a long time. Besides, he wanted to make sure Mr. Pierre had a good experience. But Jenny's expression made it clear that she did not want to watch the movie with her boss and wanted him to leave. He looks at her, but she completely ignores him. Then, Jenny notices the popcorn is gone. Stanley, noticing it, asks if she was starving. The movie hadn't even started yet, and her popcorn bucket was the biggest size. Ignoring him completely, Jenny takes a long sip of soda. Stanley wonders why he always feels like she's insulting him. Jean-Pierre uses the funny moment between them to take a picture of them. He calls them over for a photo. Everyone smiles, and behind them, the woman who approached them earlier also sneaks into the picture. Noticing the surprise, Jenny and Stanley turn around, and there she is, waving at them. She gives him a little goodbye wave. Stanley, bothered by her pretentious attitude, doesn't wave back. Beside him, Jenny judges him intensely, thinking he is a huge playboy. He lets out a long sigh. In a brief flashback, he remembers having apologized repeatedly to Jenny for the things Sandra, the woman from earlier, had said to her. The CEO explains that she constantly invited him to go out, but he always refused. The man tries to justify himself, declaring that there was nothing between Sandra and him, but Jenny walks away without looking back. Surprising him, Jenny says she does not intend to mention anything to anyone. Finishing the sentence, she explains she will not say anything about what happened, especially not to Sarah. Then, the young woman tells Stanley that he doesn't need to keep giving excuses. He doesn't quite understand what she is talking about, but he decides to stay quiet, deep down grateful for Jenny's discretion. Our protagonist turns her back on him and heads toward the cinema. Hurrying, Stanley catches up to Jenny and brusquely declares that he doesn't care what she thinks anyway. Her expression turns harsh when she hears those words. Now, inside the cinema, it was too late for him to back out, and he sits there annoyed, wondering if she even knew who he was. Finally, the lights go out, and the movie begins. Then Stanley realizes he doesn't know what he's about to watch, and asks Jenny what kind of movie it was. He hoped it was an action movie. Jenny reveals that it was a horror movie. Now, with a shadowy and amused expression, she tells him they were about to watch a horror movie. Stanley was completely unprepared. With a bit of fear, he swallows hard. In the movie, someone desperately climbs a staircase with muffled sounds in the background. Behind the person, an evil villain with a chainsaw approaches. His hand starts getting dangerously close to her hair. The movie's protagonist lets out a massive scream. Despite the terrible scene, Stanley laughs in relief. He was secretly relieved that it was another trash horror flick and not a ghost movie. If it were a ghost movie, he knew very well he wouldn't be able to sleep. Besides, he would be screaming in the cinema and grabbing Jenny's arm the whole time. Embarrassing himself like that would be the end of the world. He thinks that such humiliation would probably make her hate him even more. A moment later, he wonders how she can stay so calm. The movie only gets darker and tenser. He is completely impressed. However, looking more closely at Jenny, he notices something. The young woman was gripping the armrest of the cinema chair tightly. Looking closer, she was clearly trembling. Stanley becomes very worried about her, seeing the young woman shrink her shoulders as the horrifying scenes played. He gently touches her shoulder, calling her very softly. Stanley is shocked by what he sees. In front of him, Jenny, who had always been very tough, had her little eyes filled with tears because she was terrified of the movie. Trying to hold back her crying, Jenny reveals that she thought it was a ghost movie. From the movie poster, it really did look like something like that. A little worked up, Jenny moves closer to Stanley and says that she could handle ghost movies just fine, but she could not stand movies where some crazy guy simply went around hurting people. He gives a slight smile, suggesting that she try closing her eyes, but she complains that she was getting chills. Suddenly, in the movie, the loud sound of a chainsaw echoes. Jenny shrinks in fear. She shifts in her seat, uncomfortable with the sounds and the violent scenes of the movie. Apprehensive, Stanley watches her, finally understanding that closing her eyes would only make the terrible experience even worse. So maybe she needed to listen to something else. Grabbing his phone, he noticed that his battery was extremely low, and he also remembered that her phone battery was about to die as well. Soon, Stanley had an idea. He put his hand inside his jacket to reach something stored in an inner pocket. Then he took out a small object. In his hand, there was an MP4 player. The little music player looked very old. Stanley stared at the small MP4 for a few moments, and finally made his decision. Again, lightly touching Jenny's shoulder, he wanted to get her attention without scaring her too much. Whispering, he calls her and suggests she try something. Among the screams from the movie, Jenny lets out some curses. Yeah, our poor protagonist was really terrified. She was really struggling because of the movie. She couldn't even open her eyes. Stanley looks at her with deep empathy. He clearly didn't like seeing her that way. More screams echo in the movie, and Jenny seems desperate to escape that horrible experience. Suddenly, despite the noise, she starts to hear a light and cheerful song. Stanley, trying to help her, placed one of the earbuds in her ear. He gently moves his hand away, hoping not to scare her. Leaning closer to her, he suggests that she close her eyes and try to focus on the music. Jenny becomes very flustered by the gesture. He softly places the MP4 player in her hand. Our protagonist, now calmer, looks confused at the MP4. She wonders if he had had that music player with him the entire time. Right after, Jenny wonders if he gave her that MP4 just to calm her down. While he is distracted watching the movie, she gives him a sincere smile of gratitude. Picking up the other earbud, she notices how old it was, and she thought people didn't even own objects like that anymore. Jenny puts in the second earbud and hears a light, cheerful song with a moderate beat. Holding the MP4 firmly in her hands, she starts to calm down. It was actually a really good song. Sometime later, already at night, in front of Hotel HU, a sleek black car parks as guests arrive. A man stores a large suitcase in the trunk of the black car. Next to them, Jean-Pierre happily says goodbye to Stanley and Jenny. He had a wonderful day. Like a proper Frenchman, he says goodbye to Jenny by giving her a kiss on the cheek, thanking the young woman for the unexpected tour. And after giving her a second kiss on the other cheek, he confesses that the day was like a beautiful dream for him. With a big smile, he even shows them the t-shirt autographed by the famous actress. The writer tells them he will never forget that day. As the car drives away, Jenny comments to her boss that she had never seen anyone smile as much as Mr. Pierre. She was very grateful that he enjoyed the tour. He even got an autograph. Stanley tells her that none of it would have been possible without her. Before he can continue speaking, Jenny says goodnight, as if abruptly saying goodbye to him. Stanley is a little disappointed because he would have loved to invite her to dinner. He resigns himself to eating alone or ordering food somewhere. Finally, he remembers that they are heading in the same direction and asks her where she thinks she is going. Jenny turns to face him. Jenny seemed slightly annoyed and he noticed her expression. She begins explaining that, technically, but before she finishes the sentence, he clears his throat and asks what she was talking about. With a determined expression, Jenny tells him that the day was not over yet. Stanley has no idea what she meant. Now, with a lot of energy, she says that she had not used the whole day. He gets a little scared. What was she talking about? And then, Jenny reveals the black card he had given her early that morning. Although she thought it was a card reserved only for the very rich, he knew it was just a corporate card. Trying to convince him, she asks if she can use the card to pay for a dinner for herself. Stanley gives a smile. He tells her that would not be possible. After all, she should not use the corporate card for personal purposes. That sudden disappointment hit Jenny hard. She gently returns the card to him and tells him that it is time for her to go. Disappointed that she wouldn't be able to use the card, Jenny turns around to leave. Surprising her, Stanley asks her to wait a moment. With a slight smile, he declares that since she had done such a good job, he would like to reward her. Jenny is very surprised by his words. What could this reward be? In a bowl full of tteokbokki, Jenny picks up one of the rice cakes. And if by any chance, one rice cake was deeply in love with that scallion, but the scallion doesn't show the same feelings toward the rice cake, even though it is secretly in love too. There, in the basement, Jenny hangs up her work uniform and wonders why Sarah keeps pushing Stanley away. Our protagonist talks absent-mindedly to the food, to the point of asking the scallions to reply to her. After all, if Sarah didn't like Stanley, why did she act that way? Jenny wondered while eating her dinner. She remembered Stanley's generosity after he offered her a reward for her good service. Jenny was hopeful that it would be a professional reward, the kind that comes in white envelopes. She wanted to stop being an intern and finally become a full-time employee. However, Stanley reveals that the reward would be him paying for a dinner for her. Our protagonist was disappointed, thinking she got excited for nothing. He asks what she would like to eat, offering lobster, steaks. Stanley said she could choose anything she wanted, but in the young woman's mind, she only wanted a permanent work contract. It was a very difficult decision, and she needed a few minutes to choose. Stanley smiles at her when he sees her thinking with such intensity. Before our protagonist can even decide, Sarah comes running, interrupting the two of them. The girl explains herself, saying that she wanted to say goodbye to Mr. Pierre, but it seems she had arrived too late. Sarah tells her that she had done a great job, but despite the praise, Jenny feels a little uncomfortable seeing her coworker. The red-haired girl explains that she should have explored more tour options for Mr. Pierre and apologizes to Jenny. After seeing Sarah's true colors, Jenny can't show any reaction. Jenny sees that Stanley still wanted to win Sarah's affection, and he consoles the girl by saying that everyone knew how competent she was. Smiling sweetly, Sarah thanks him for his kindness. The man, giving small laughs, notices that it was already getting late and asks Sarah what she was still doing at work. She tries to explain herself, saying that she was finishing a few things. Our protagonist notices that the CEO always had a certain type of look when he was with Sarah. It was as if the world belonged only to the two of them. She wonders if she should quietly slip away. Still excited at the prospect of getting free food, Jenny decides to wait a little longer. Laughing to herself, she wonders if she should invite Sarah to dinner with them, because that way she would help the mission of making her fall in love with Stanley. Politely, Jenny asks her coworker if she had plans, but she is rudely interrupted by Sarah, who asks Stanley if he was busy at that moment. Sarah explains that she would like to talk to him about the Seoul Bank event because they want to change it into an exclusive event for the founding family. Jenny feels very awkward as she watches her coworker rambling nonstop about the event budget, about how she didn't want to make mistakes. Seeing Sarah take all of Stanley's attention, Jenny becomes a little sad, thinking that she would have to say goodbye to the free food that night. Stanley hesitates for a few moments. That comforts Jenny somehow, since he seemed to be conflicted because of her. She gestures to him while whispering that they can have dinner another night. Stanley and Sarah seem unable to understand what she was doing. Jenny makes an okay hand sign. Stanley didn't seem willing to let her go. Quickly, he turns to Sarah and tells her that if the matter wasn't urgent, how about they talk about those details early in the morning? Jenny is surprised. Immediately, our protagonist sees an opportunity and says goodbye to the two of them. Before Stanley can do anything, Jenny had already disappeared. He even tries to call her by name, but she was already far away. Back in her basement, she eats a peaceful dinner, wondering what those two might be doing at that moment. Did they go to dinner together? Jenny thinks for a bit. Secretly, she really wished she had someone to have dinner with. Pushing those thoughts away, she remembers the MP4 player from the movie theater that day. She had kept it, and it was clear that it was very old. While picking up the music player, she realizes she had forgotten to return it. Our protagonist lies down on her futon, remembering that on that day, right after the movie, Stanley needed to take a phone call, and she needed to pay attention to Mr. Pierre. She looks closely at the small object, assuming it must be something very valuable to the CEO, because even though it was very old, he still carried it with him. And even though it was something so valuable, he insisted that she use it during the moment she was so scared. She quietly handles the MP4 in her hands. Jenny plays a little with the small object, turning it to see its details. Finally, she gives a tender smile. There, on the back of the device, there is a small photo attached, showing a much younger Stanley with his parents. He really looked a lot like his mother. She lightly touches the photo. You could see he looked about 11 or 12 years old, and despite the cute child appearance, he also seemed like he had a mischievous streak. Jenny looks affectionately at that photo, imagining that no one in the hotel knew what he might have been like as a child. Was she the only person who knew him that way? Our protagonist seems lost in her thoughts for a few moments. It was as if she felt that she had seen something she shouldn't have. A new day begins at Hotel HU. Stanley walks accompanied by his secretary Barney and another executive. Then he sits for yet another meeting, this time with another director. Despite the busy day, he seemed very calm. Jenny, anxious from the rush of work, wondered all the time, what could she do to return the MP4 to him? Since going directly to him was not an option, she wanted to return it as soon as possible. But handing the music player to the secretary would raise a lot of suspicion. Possibly, she would ask Jenny why an intern had such a personal belonging of the CEO. To Jenny, the only solution was to give it to him personally. And all she wanted was for him to come to her and ask for the MP4 back. Days had already passed since the movie theater, but because of many work commitments, she couldn't reach him. Not to mention, she didn't have his cell number, only his office phone. Thinking about the situation, she realized how they lived completely different lives. If not for the fateful day he found her in the basement and the promise she had made, maybe they would have never even looked each other in the eye, or ever had the chance to talk honestly. At that moment, Jenny saw Stanley leaving, accompanied by other important men from the hotel. Suddenly, a thought passed through her mind. Holding the music player tightly in her hands, she felt that he was very distant. There at Hotel HU, many guests arrived at every moment. Jenny hands a card and a welcome pamphlet to a guest. The young woman steps away from the counter and Jenny gives a nod. From afar, Jenny sees Stanley walking alone without Barney or the other executives. Finally, this was her chance. She runs to the front of the hotel, calling out to him, but he was so distracted that he didn't seem to hear her. Our protagonist tries in vain to reach him, but unfortunately, the elegant sedan had already driven off. After that short run, Jenny realizes that despite everything, he was still a CEO full of commitments, and reaching him was very difficult. Remembering the troubled history between them, Jenny finds herself thinking she should have treated him better. Still thinking about what she should do, she hears someone calling for Sarah. Jenny sees, from afar, Sarah approaching a guy, apologizing for the delay, to which he politely replies that he had just arrived. The two exchange friendly smiles. Our protagonist freezes. Did Sarah have a secret boyfriend? Oh no, what would happen to Stanley's feelings if he found out about that? But even more important than his feelings, what was at stake was Jenny's housing, since he could use that as an excuse to evict her. While watching their car drive away, Jenny thinks about how she will talk to Sarah about that. Another day, another full agenda of meetings for Stanley. His elegant black car approaches the commercial center. Barney opens the door and tells the boss that this is their last meeting of the day. The secretary comments that it had been a hectic week, and Stanley comments that aside from that day at the cinema, the whole time he had only worked. Barney asks if he enjoyed the movie tickets. He wanted to give the boss a little break, but Stanley responds that he thought it was only a strategy for Barney to go home early. Changing the subject, Barney asks what he thought of the movie. The blonde guy says he heard the movie was really scary, and immediately asks if Stanley got scared. Did he scream a lot? Stanley, annoyed by the questions, says that the movie had violent scenes, but not scary ones. The two were walking through the shopping center. Then Barney asks if Stanley intends to officially hire Jenny. The secretary reminds him that the young woman had done an excellent job with the writer's tour. Stanley admits that he would wait until the performance evaluation to give her extra points because of the good work. Barney suggests that he could have taken her out to dinner after the cinema. Barney comments that it was the least he could have done, or even given her his credit card. Stanley feels hurt by the remark. As they head to the elevator, Stanley reflects on how busy he has been, that he hadn't seen the intern since the day at the cinema. He remembers Jenny telling him not to worry about her, but he still felt bad that she had left so quickly. Then, something catches the CEO's attention. A store displayed several elegant handbags with different colors and sizes. The memories from the cinema day come back to him. He remembered her struggling to close her bag, which had a broken clasp. Stanley thinks that maybe something like that could cheer Jenny up. Right before the elevator arrives, the CEO thinks that the gesture might be a bit too much, but he could make up for it. Waking the boss from his thoughts, Barney asks if he was still coming. A beautiful handbag, in cream color with golden clasps and delicate straps. Jenny, holding the bag, asks if that gift was really for her. There in the staff lounge, Sarah fills a mug with coffee while explaining that the handbag was a gift from Mr. Pierre as a thank you for the tour. Sarah comments that it was a lovely gift and sits at the table with Jenny and the other secretaries. Sarah gives a smile, but Jenny can no longer let herself be fooled by appearances and was still a little confused about the gift. The other girls become very curious, wondering how much a bag like that might have cost. The other young woman even says she had never seen a bag from that brand before. Wow, that bag cost $1,500. One of the jealous girls was completely in disbelief. They found the whole thing very unbelievable and praised the generosity of some guests. While Jenny absent-mindedly looked at the bag, one of them complained about not even receiving tips. Jenny becomes a little apprehensive, thinking that the gift was a bit too much. Suddenly, one of the girls asked in a very nosy way how she had gotten it. The jealous girl asked Jenny how she managed to get Mr. Pierre to choose her as the guide and not other people. Trying to imply something malicious, the girl with light hair claims that Jenny must have done something different, as if she had seduced him on purpose. The girl's words give Jenny a certain feeling of disgust. Our protagonist thinks that behavior is extremely childish and problematic. Trying to provoke Jenny, the young woman comments that she seemed to try very hard to get the CEO's attention and asks her to tell her secret. Jenny becomes very uncomfortable with her words, and the girl insists on asking how she had managed to seduce men. Our protagonist carefully places the bag back inside the gift bag, and then claims that she must attract the attention of men because she is just too beautiful. And she even adds that beauty is something that cannot be taught. However, the truth is that Jenny knew she could not say any of those things and decided to stay silent, which made the girl even more irritated. Then, she says something in French, leaving the two girls confused. Elegantly, Jenny tells the two of them in French that they should take some time to learn the language. Furious, one of the girls asks Jenny what she was saying. Jenny stands up from the table and explains that they should use their free time to learn French, because that's what she did. One of the girls begins to laugh, while the other remains furious because of Jenny's honest reply. Jenny says goodbye to them, and Sarah looks at her while the other girls call the intern rude. One of the girls says that Jenny should not have interfered and arranged the tour for Mr. Pierre, because that made Sarah look bad in front of everyone. But she was very professional, and only said that she was happy that Mr. Pierre had a good day. One of the secretaries asked if they were allowed to receive expensive gifts from guests. That catches the other girl's attention. Growling to her friend, she asks her not to tell Jenny, so Jenny could be punished. Sarah listens silently while the girls say terrible things about Jenny. She displays a satisfied smile before taking a sip of her coffee. Hidden in a hallway, Jenny just wants to stay far away from the staff lounge. Our protagonist stood there, leaning against the wall, apparently reflecting on her life choices. The only thing she wanted most was to be as discreet as possible in life, and to be invisible to people. She wished Sarah hadn't handed her the bag there, in front of the other employees. Apparently, it was only natural that Sarah hated her, after Jenny made her feel jealous of Stanley. Now, because of the plan, she had no way of asking Sarah about the mysterious guy. And because of Sarah, all the other girls were going to start hating her. A little sad, Jenny lets out a long sigh. All she wanted most was to be officially hired and not be the subject of any gossip. It seemed that problems were inevitable when her emotions affected her relationships, and that happened because she got involved in someone's love life. Everything she had built was falling apart. Then she remembers Stanley's gentle touch. She also remembers the sincere conversations they had, and how he took care of her at the cinema. Jenny realized something very serious. Those feelings would not be good for her. The young woman needed to distance herself from Stanley before everything got worse. Then, waking her from her thoughts, someone behind her called her attention. With a smile, Stanley asks Jenny what she was talking about. The CEO seemed very happy to see her. She stops for a few moments. Stanley, teasing her, says she looked like a little puppy with that expression. He explains that he was just about to call her. The man hands her a gift bag. Stanley gives her the present and explains that even though it was a little late, he would like her to accept that reward. Sometime later, in the CEO's office, on the table, there were several delicious sushi. Someone starts with the salmon. Barney was excitedly eating the sushi and praised the food, saying it melted in his mouth. He asks Stanley if he wasn't going to eat anything. Barney tries to convince the boss to eat something by waving a piece of sushi in front of him. Stanley says he wasn't hungry, and Barney says he refuses to work extra just to feed him. The secretary asks where the boss got such delicious sushi. Were they leftovers from some important meeting? The guy assumes it also wouldn't be a gift, since many people didn't like raw fish. Stanley agrees without giving many details. He remembered that he didn't want to give her anything too expensive, and sushi was in the ideal price range, easy to eat and clean. It would be the perfect food to eat in the basement. Or at least, that's what he thought when he tried to hand her the bag. Even though it took a little while, he would be really happy if she accepted that reward. However, Jenny just kept staring at the bag without saying anything else. Stanley, a little awkward, commented that he hoped he didn't overdo it, but that he ended up waiting in line for a long time to get it. He confesses that he felt he should give her something, even if it wasn't anything that special. And as soon as it was time for her evaluation, he looks at her, hopeful. However, before even taking the bag, Jenny quickly steps back, letting out a slightly nervous laugh. She says, a bit embarrassed, that she was only doing her job and didn't need any reward. Stanley tries to make her accept it, explaining that it wasn't an expensive gift. However, at the end of the hallway, Jenny was hearing some commotion. She looks around and sees some employees talking from afar. The girls were laughing about something. Feeling mild dread, Jenny becomes uncomfortable because of it. Stanley does not understand the sudden change in her attitude. Without saying goodbye, Jenny runs off down the hotel hallway. The CEO stays there, completely confused. A little sad, he wonders why she didn't want to accept the gift. And then, he hears the sound of a woman's shoes heading toward him. Jenny was coming back. Quickly, she stops right in front of him. Still out of breath, the young woman was holding his MP4 in her hands, ready to return it. Jenny hands him the music player, apologizing for not being able to return it earlier. And then she turns around and runs away from him again. Stanley holds the object delicately. So that was why she was constantly following him and hiding around the hotel? Apparently, Jenny was not very good at hiding. He thinks that she didn't need to hide from him like that. On the MP4, she had left a sweet little note. "Thank you, boss. You were a cute kid." Stanley smiles, finally understanding that Jenny didn't want to be caught holding such a personal item from the boss. However, unfortunately, he still didn't know what she liked. He seemed a bit sad, lost in his thoughts. Barney eats the last sushi. Stanley was bothered because that sushi was hard to get, and Barney was not the one who was supposed to be eating it. The secretary loved the meal and gave a little grin to show his gratitude. After finishing all the delicious sushi, Barney begins to open a bottle of water and asks if Stanley still had a crush on Sarah. He had noticed that it had been a while since he last mentioned her. Stanley realized that it was true. Barney confesses that he recently saw her getting into some guy's car. Stanley gives an awkward laugh, assuming it must have been just a friend. Then Barney questions him, saying, if Sarah and the supposed guy were just friends, why did the guy give her a bouquet of roses? That information caught Stanley completely off guard. With a slight air of sadness, Stanley ponders for a few moments. Then, Barney tells him that if he still had feelings for Sarah, he should confess to her. And then he takes a long sip from the water bottle. Stanley seemed very upset with that conversation. He knew he needed a plan. Later that day, while Jenny worked, some colleagues gossiped at the front desk and looked at her with malice. That really shook Jenny. Later, in the hotel parking lot, Stanley was waiting for someone. He typed anxiously on his phone. Gathering courage, Stanley sent messages to Sarah, asking them to talk in the parking lot. He looked very distressed. Remembering a few hours earlier, when they had bumped into each other, Stanley had asked if she would be free later. He asked if they could talk later, explaining that he would like to speak privately. Sarah was shocked by the request. Stanley's expression was anxious and sad. Was it too soon? She says she is free that night and gives a slightly uneasy smile. Stanley deeply hopes that she is starting to like him. He truly hopes that she likes him. At the hotel, walking through some empty rooms, Jenny squeezed her eyes shut tightly. Stanley looked very frightened. In a major turn of events, our protagonists kiss. The two stare at each other without letting go, wondering what that was. The man impatiently looks at his messages, waiting for a response from Sarah. He assumes she was probably still busy with work. Stanley looks around. The parking lot was calm and almost empty at that time. That place brought back memories. He starts to remember the incident had happened there in that exact place. Some years ago, Stanley was with Sarah in the parking lot. He asked if she was liking Hotel HU, which was very different from Hotel SUN. She says she liked it a lot, and that the new job was very efficient. She seemed very happy with the flexible hours and the employee benefits were great. Trying to tease her, the CEO says that speech was very suspicious. Sarah waves her arms, claiming she was telling the truth. With a smile, he says he was relieved. She returns the smile, very friendly. While the two talked absent-mindedly, two people approached on a motorcycle. Suddenly, the motorcyclist turned on the high beams and accelerated hard. The noise of the motorcycle and the lights scared Stanley and Sarah. The two mysterious people on the motorcycle sped up to get closer to them. Trying to protect her, Stanley pulled Sarah closer to him. The motorcycle accelerated frantically, the tires making a lot of noise on the parking lot floor. For a few seconds, Stanley makes eye contact with a mysterious person wearing a helmet. Inexplicably, Stanley is injured by them. Everything happened so fast that he barely had time to react. Losing strength, Stanley begins to faint. Sarah screams, completely terrified. The young woman was horrified, and Stanley tried to remain conscious. He tried in vain to contain the red stains. Looking at his hands soaked in red, Stanley began to lose consciousness. The CEO no longer had any sense of what was happening, and wondered if Sarah was okay. Sarah screamed by his side. Back to the present, Stanley assumes that it must have been because of that incident that Sarah drastically distanced herself from him. He imagines it must have been terrible for her to witness a scene like that. Alone there in the parking lot, Stanley lets out a long sigh. However, thanks to Jenny, he believed that Sarah's feelings toward him had changed, and because of that, he hoped that he and Sarah could start over. Could they have a new chance? And for a few moments, he remembers Jenny's adorable smile saying that he looked handsome, and how the young woman was willing to help him in exchange for the rental arranged between them. He remembered how she was on the day they went to the cinema. Jenny was very optimistic that Sarah would return his feelings. Those memories caught him by surprise. Then Jenny's voice woke him from his memories. She had just arrived there and asked him if he was already going home. Still a bit surprised, he doesn't respond, leaving the young woman unsure. A little hesitant, he asks Jenny what she was doing there. Soon she shows him a pair of children's shoes, explaining that a guest asked her to retrieve them because the child had left them in the parking lot. He listens to her attentively, and then gives a friendly smile. The little shoes really were adorable. Jenny watches him and decides to put her plan into action. Our protagonist reveals that for some time, there was something she couldn't get out of her head. Determined, Jenny confesses that she would like to declare her feelings for Stanley. Stanley noticed that the young woman's cheeks were slightly flushed. What could that mean? Quickly, Jenny explains herself, saying that her plan was to make Sarah even more jealous by letting her see the intern asking the boss out. Deep down, Stanley was relieved, but didn't know why. As much as he wouldn't admit it, his heart had started beating faster. She explains to the CEO that if someone sees the person they like being invited out by someone else, it creates a feeling of urgency. So Jenny's strategy was to make Sarah so jealous that she would admit her feelings for Stanley. Jenny explains that it would catch her by surprise. She continues, saying that once your feelings for someone start to change, the relationship between the two changes as well. Stanley remains silent while Jenny asks what he thought of that strategy. Our determined protagonist tells him she would do anything to make it look real. However, he refuses, which leaves her surprised. He explains gently that he no longer wants to make Sarah jealous and that he has decided to tell her how he feels. Jenny nods, but she can't hide from him that she is slightly disappointed. Stanley thanks her for all her efforts, but says that he no longer wants her to worry about anything. Now she can focus only on work so she can do well in the performance evaluation. Those words leave Jenny speechless, but she seemed grateful to stop. Before ending everything, Stanley says he would like to give her some advice. He asks that she never try to act again, not even occasionally. The CEO seemed happy and relieved to talk to her, but the young woman seemed a little unsure about her future. While holding the little shoes, she secretly regrets that she will no longer have reasons to go talk to him. Then, Jenny begins to say goodbye so she can take the shoes to the guest. Suddenly, a door slams nearby. The noise catches them both off guard, and they hear some swearing. A couple was fighting because apparently the husband was already known there at the hotel, and the woman thought he was lying because the employees recognized him, while he tried in vain to explain that he had already been there for business meetings. They fight fiercely in front of Stanley and Jenny, who watch silently, hoping to go unnoticed. The woman rudely turns to leave, while her husband calls for her, trying to fix the situation. She starts running, and he tries to reach her in the parking lot. Suddenly, the heavy suitcase gets slightly stuck on the ground. Those damn wheels got caught on everything. The husband, annoyed, pulls the suitcase very hard. And then the wheel of the suitcase snaps off, while the two of them continue yelling at each other. The suitcase shakes near Jenny, and predictably, it ends up hitting the young woman. Jenny immediately loses balance, falling backward. Frightened, Stanley watches all of it. Suddenly, he realizes something very serious. If she fell any further, Jenny would hit her head against the wall and could get seriously hurt. The young woman was already fearing the fall. In a quick gesture, Stanley catches Jenny's head, and to steady herself, she grips his tie tightly. For a moment, they are there, supporting each other. The CEO is completely paralyzed, not knowing what to do. Trying to regain balance, the young woman pulls his tie. Unexpectedly, that gesture that was once protective turns into a sincere kiss between them. It's as if time had stopped for Jenny and Stanley. It seemed like they could barely stand. The kiss hadn't ended yet. Apparently, it was so good that Jenny forgot she was holding the little shoes. They fall on the ground, completely forgotten. The two finally open their eyes and both have deeply flushed cheeks. Stanley quickly pulls away from Jenny, who is still a little hypnotized by the kiss. Without thinking much, she pulls his tie again. He looks at her, still hesitant. She looks at him, still blushing from the unexpected moment. Stanley leans toward her again. The two stare at each other in silence. He was about to say something to her. Jenny, with sparkling eyes, waited for what he was going to say. Breaking the magical moment between them, Stanley asks if she could finally let go of his tie. She immediately lets go, apologizing to the boss. The man clears his throat, still a bit awkward from the sudden kiss. He tries to justify himself by saying that he didn't want her to hit her head. He continues speaking, apologizing to her. Our protagonist looks at him with tears in her eyes. He is caught off guard and feels uneasy, afraid he might have hurt her feelings. A million intrusive thoughts run through his mind, and Stanley starts to fear that she might have some kind of aversion to him. Jenny reveals to him that her lip was injured. She says she was feeling a lot of pain, and thinks she must have bitten her lip when she was about to fall. Stanley feels relieved, seeing that it wasn't his fault. Touching her delicate lower lip, Jenny asked if there was any red mark. The CEO reaches out to take a closer look, while asking if it was hurting that badly. He touches her lip, asking if it might have hit against a tooth. Gently, he warns that there was slight redness and that it might swell a little, but it was nothing serious. Still examining Jenny's lip, he explains that maybe the next day it would be a bit more swollen. Involuntarily, he caresses Jenny's mouth. With great kindness, he suggests that she apply some cream to help it get better. She asks if a cream could help reduce the pain and swelling. Our protagonist is still very flushed, especially when she feels his touch on her lips. The two stare at each other in silence, both with very red cheeks. Suddenly, the sound of high heels fills the parking lot. Sarah arrives at that exact moment and stares at the two for a few seconds. She simply turns her back and leaves. Sarah doesn't even bother wasting time hearing any explanation from those two. Jenny and Stanley remain motionless as she gets into her car and speeds out of the parking lot. The two were very confused by what had just happened. The parking lot becomes silent after Sarah drives away. Far away, in a residential neighborhood, Sarah parks. Her house was quite large. She announces that she is home and comes across several boxes right at the entrance. While taking off her shoes, she asks her mother whose boxes those were. Her mother replies that they were from Sarah's father's business. The young woman gives a sarcastic smile, knowing her father's questionable character. She complains to her mother that last time it was something with floorboards and wonders what it could be this time. The woman was there practicing some bizarre yoga pose. Adorned with jewelry and a terrifying facial mask, Sarah's mother replies that they were deer antlers. Sarah is shocked at how far her father had gone this time. The young woman asks if that was regulated in any way. Trying to hold balance in another bizarre yoga pose, Sarah's mother replies that her husband had never done anything regulated, but they found their warehouse and those boxes were all they managed to save. Deeply irritated, Sarah asks if they couldn't just have a little more class and find some job that wouldn't get them in trouble. The mother, also with questionable character, says that Sarah should stop complaining and put herself in her proper place. Changing poses in her yoga, the woman says that Sarah should stop pretending to be someone she's not, and that she should be grateful for what she has. Sarah becomes even more irritated by her mother's words. Trying clumsily to keep balance, Sarah's mother wonders why her daughter had that strange obsession with being classy. Sarah walks away as her mother keeps saying a lot of nonsense. Entering her room, Sarah throws herself onto her bed, exhausted after a long day of work. She reaches for her bag and grabs her phone. Opening the messages, she sees that the guy she was dating, Samuel, hadn't responded to any of her messages. She wonders why he was ignoring her. After all, on their last date, he had even given her a bouquet of roses. Annoyed, she tosses the phone aside and turns in bed to think for a moment. She remembers the scene she saw earlier, her own boss touching the intern's lips. Sarah thinks for a few moments about the situation. All of that was very strange to her. If that tragic day hadn't happened, she even remembers the next day, at the hospital. She had gone to visit Stanley to wish him well. As she got close to the door, she overheard Barney asking if that had been an attempt by the 7-Star Mafia. Did they want some kind of revenge? Stanley asked the secretary not to tell his grandfather anything. The blonde guy says it was precisely because of him, Chairman Kwan. Still very tired, Stanley asks that none of that reaches his grandfather, because there could be other consequences, and he didn't want anything like that to happen again. Sarah hears from afar Stanley saying that he wanted the least possible involvement with his grandfather. Barney admits he was relieved that he wasn't hurt worse. She was holding a beautiful fruit basket, but it was never delivered because she turned around and left. The young woman was very upset to discover that Stanley and his family were involved with the Korean mafia. Back to the present, a celebration was happening at Hotel Hue. Jenny and other employees were arranging the elegant tables. Suddenly, one of them maliciously points out that Jenny has an injured lip and should take better care of her appearance. The jealous girl says that nobody cares if she speaks more languages if she looks sloppy. Jenny simply ignores the mean comments and keeps polishing a glass. Outraged by Jenny's calm reaction, the girl tries to provoke her further. asking if someone had punched her in the face for ignoring them since she was so arrogant. Jenny remains silent. How could she be such an arrogant person if she sleeps in a camping sleeping bag? However, a good memory pulls her thoughts away from her coworker's provocation. She remembered how that kiss had been much softer than she imagined. Just thinking about it made her heart race. She remembers how close she got to Stanley. Holding the sleeping bag blanket, she recalls the sensation. It was like kissing her dog, Marley. It was really soft, a little wet, nothing more, nothing less than that. Thinking about Stanley brought her feelings as warm as remembering Marley. Our protagonist tries to fight against her own feelings, redirecting her thoughts to her little dog. She quickly stands up when she hears someone calling her. Paying more attention, she hears a light knock on the door. Who could it be at that hour? When she opens the door, Jenny finds Stanley. She was still trying to organize her thoughts and almost called him Marley. Stanley asks her, "Who was Marley?" Jenny immediately apologizes and asks him to forget what she said. Stanley looks at her slightly offended. Then she asks what he was doing there. He apologizes for calling her so late. The girl notices that he seemed to have washed his hair recently, and on top of that, he was wearing casual and comfortable clothes, different from his everyday suits. She asks if he had just gotten off work, and he realizes he was wearing very casual clothes. He had even swapped his elegant leather shoes for slippers. Jenny asks if he lived near the hotel. Stanley explains to her that he lives in the hotel's penthouse, right there, in the first tower. Jenny is impressed, especially since she is temporarily living in the basement. He explains that she needs a special pass to access the penthouse. Where he lived, there was a private pool, gym, sauna, and lounge. There were all the luxuries she could imagine. Most guests dreamed of seeing that place. Those special suites cost more than $1,000 per night. Jenny admits she never imagined he lived in such a privileged place. He says it was something very convenient. Suddenly, after a series of flashbacks, Stanley realizes how privileged he is, and at that moment feels guilty for having tried to charge Jenny money. The young woman doesn't seem to give much importance to the past events and points out a curious fact. They were practically neighbors. Thinking about it for a moment, Stanley admits she was right. Finally, she asks again what he was doing there at the hotel entrance. He had forgotten for a few moments. He hands her a bag with appetizing sandwiches and a facial cream. Trying to help her, he says that it's a cream that will help reduce inflammation. He insists on helping her since he had extra at home. But instead of listening to him, Jenny focuses on the CEO's beautiful lips. While he spoke, our protagonist looked distant, her heart racing in her chest. She keeps insisting on associating him with her dog, Marley. Interrupting what he was saying, Jenny tries to change the subject, explaining that the other day Sarah must have misunderstood what happened between them. Stanley didn't understand what she was trying to tell him. Calmly, he asks her not to worry about it, because he will fix things. And besides, regarding what happened, but something had changed inside him. Stanley also remembered the kiss. The memories seemed to come back strongly to him. The two seemed to remember at the same time, and they both blushed at the same time. Jenny starts babbling nonstop, saying that it could have happened to anyone. It was like tripping on the street or getting hit in the face with a ball, things like that. Stanley becomes very embarrassed. A little awkwardly, he explains that he had been worried about her and everything. Jenny accidentally scolds him while calling him Marley. Stanley asks her who Marley was. She explains that he is her dog, and the kiss made her think of the times he licked her face when he was in a good mood. Saying goodbye quickly to the boss, she grabs the bag, tells him she was very hungry, and wishes him a good night. After Jenny slams the door in his face, he stands there in shock for a while for being compared to her dog. Jenny's heart was still pounding in her chest. She stays behind the door for a few moments with very flushed cheeks, trying to understand her own feelings. Back to the present moment, our protagonist hears her coworker complaining about being ignored, annoyed that Jenny didn't take her provocation seriously. Jenny quickly calls her an idiot, a very arrogant idiot. The short-haired girl becomes furious after hearing those words. Jenny immediately explains that she was walking down the street like an arrogant idiot and fell, injuring her lip. The other coworker asks if she had been drinking, but Jenny also ignores her and simply informs that she will go organize other parts of the event. The enraged coworker swears that Jenny insulted her and desperately wants to start a fight with her, but she is held back by her colleague. Jenny walks away, and although she is a very strong woman, that drama seemed to drain her a lot. Stanley was deeply distracted in his car while Barney explained about a major event in the summit between South Korea and the USA, claiming that other hotels would probably try to negotiate to host such event. When they stopped at the red light, Stanley asked the secretary if he looked like a dog. Barney has no reaction to such an absurd question. To annoy the boss, he says that Stanley was like a big chihuahua. And besides, he asks what was the reason for the question. Had he gotten into some fight recently? Barney asks if it was because Stanley looked as tired as a dog. Who could he have fought with or gone drinking with? He didn't have close friends. Stopping the teasing, Barney states that for a man like Stanley, it must be difficult to be in love, since he was always used to getting everything so easily. Barney asks him if he was still upset because Sarah received flowers from another guy. Then the secretary advises the boss to be more confident and drop the hesitation. After all, the accident happened a long time ago. Stanley realized that a lot of time had passed since the kiss, and he hadn't gone to talk to Sarah. Barney becomes worried about his boss and asks him if he was sick, while Barney says he'll arrange something for him because the meeting was very important. Jenny walks calmly beside the black sedan. She heads toward a modest restaurant. And then, Stanley notices the girl near the car. Barney sees her too and asks if that was the intern Jenny. She was walking so distracted that she didn't even notice them passing by in the car. The traffic light finally turns green and the driver starts the car. Stanley watches through the window as she enters the fried chicken restaurant, wondering if she went there to drink with someone. Immediately, several questions pop into his head. After all, how could she be going out drinking with an injured lip? Did she use the cream? He didn't want her to get even more hurt. With a small laugh, he tries to push the thoughts away. Jenny was an adult woman and knew how to take care of herself. Talking to himself, Stanley complains about how she shouldn't be drinking, but he had nothing to do with that. Barney watches him silently, a bit frightened. The secretary wonders if the boss went a little crazy after some mysterious night of drinking. As evening falls, an orange sunset covers the city. On that avenue, all the cars were stuck because of rush hour. Drivers were doing everything they could to escape that chaos. Outside, in front of the fried chicken restaurant, a person dressed as a chicken was trying to attract customers. Meanwhile, inside the car, Stanley and Barney talked about how the negotiation had been easy. Out of pure curiosity, Barney asked if Stanley had prepared for that meeting, because he had worked late many nights. With an arrogant smile, Stanley answers the secretary that he is a man who always gets what he wants. Barney feels a bit relieved seeing the boss acting the way he usually does. Despite the joke, Stanley tells the secretary that it is a personal habit of his. The CEO needs to conquer everything he desires, even though it is exhausting. Barney says sincerely that it is also an arrogant attitude, to always chase everything you want at any cost. The guy continues saying that it makes Stanley blind to the fact that people change and makes it hard to recognize how he really feels, as if it brought more uncertainty. However, Stanley only asks if Barney is calling him arrogant. Avoiding the confrontation, he explains that he just wanted the boss to relax a little. With great maturity, Barney says that Stanley should be open to understanding what he is truly feeling. Reflecting on the secretary's words, the CEO presses the window touch sensor. He lowers the car window and looks outside with boredom. The city and its buildings were already completely orange with the end of the day. Visiting a long buried memory, the truth was that Stanley couldn't remember the last time he had truly felt at peace. He pauses for a few moments, revisiting those moments. Outside, the person dressed as a chicken continues doing their dance. Stanley and Barney pass in front of the restaurant, watching the person in the costume. Immediately, the chicken becomes even more awkward, frozen in embarrassment. The chicken turns its back to them and tries to fix the costume. It lets out a huge sigh of relief. And then, the chicken goes back to dancing as if nothing had happened. Barney notices that it dances like a robot. The secretary points out that the restaurant had just opened, saying that a bit of fried chicken and a beer wouldn't be bad at that moment. Stanley raises the car window, and the chicken feels relieved. The traffic eases up, and the elegant black sedan drives away from the front of the restaurant. What a surprise. It was Jenny, our protagonist. The girl is relieved that they didn't recognize her inside that ridiculous costume. She watches the car drive away quickly, grateful that her boss didn't see her there. Inside the car, Stanley gives a faint smile after an exhausting day. An elegant chandelier lights up a sophisticated restaurant. In a delicate jewelry box, there was a shiny necklace that looked very expensive. Sarah looks attentively at the necklace, noticing that the guy hadn't tried to make any excuses this time. Although a few days had passed, she still remembers how she found Stanley and the intern in the company parking lot. How irritating. Calling her attention, Samuel reveals that his mother had chosen the delicate necklace. The guy says his mother told him that women like stylish things, and he hopes she liked the gift. She holds the necklace, noticing its details, and tells him the jewel is very beautiful. Sarah puts on the necklace, and he compliments her, saying she looked gorgeous wearing it. Surprising the young woman, he confesses that his mother would love to meet her because he had told her many things about Sarah. Samuel asks if she would like to have dinner with them soon. Sarah gets excited by the invitation because she really wants to meet his family. Waving to the waiter, the refined young man orders 2 cakes to go, while Sarah imagines that earlier he was just playing hard to get. While she sips her tea, Samuel explains that the cakes at that restaurant are incredible, and if she would like, she could take one for her mother. Sarah is secretly relieved, thinking she had won the guy over. Near their table, some people were speaking very loudly, even saying rude things. That noise catches Sarah by surprise. At the neighboring table, some elderly women were laughing very loudly, saying silly things, drawing the attention of everyone there. Samuel confides to Sarah that he hates rude people and that he hopes everyone else has good manners. He hoped that the restaurant would become more selective with its clientele. The young woman hears him say that he hated being around people like that and suggests they finish their drinks quickly and hurry to go see the Tchaikovsky ballet. Briefly ignoring his comment, Sarah asks Samuel how he would feel if she were one of those people. The guy laughs, telling her not to be ridiculous. He quickly answers that of course his mother would disapprove of their relationship, and therefore they wouldn't be able to see each other anymore. Sarah gives an awkward laugh, not knowing how to deal with those words. Deep down, she thought Samuel was a spoiled mama's boy. Samuel stops laughing for a moment and asks bluntly if she was like those people. Politely, Sarah gives him a smile and says no. Far away, on the other side of the city, it was already very late at night. A drunk guy was making chicken sounds. Apparently, he was determined to bother Jenny. Inside that chicken costume, nearby, a friend who was just as drunk tried to stop him from doing something stupid. Jenny was deeply irritated and bothered by that harassment. The man wouldn't leave her alone, repeating chicken noises and asking where she lived. Luckily, she manages to break free and runs in the other direction. The guy was so drunk he thought Jenny was flying away. The man grabs the cape of the costume firmly. Annoying the chicken even more, he begs her to play with him and not leave. He even asks her to do some K-pop dance. She tries to escape from them, while the two men insist she perform some viral dance from a famous group. The man starts pulling the cape harder, bothering our protagonist more and more. He jumps several times, begging her to dance for him. Jenny becomes furious because of the insistence. And then she slaps the drunk guy hard. With a loud thud, he collapses on the ground. The other drunk friend asks if he was okay, and the man complains that he had been attacked by the chicken. The other guy quickly stands up and, with a lot of force, slaps Jenny again. As expected, the chicken costume mask goes rolling down the sidewalk. The drunk guy then realizes that he had hit a girl. She looks at them in shock. Forgetting the fight that had just happened, the two guys think Jenny is really hot. The two men start circling her, claiming that she should have told them she was a hot woman and they would never have hit her. Jenny was deeply upset with the situation, forcing herself to think about the money she would make from that job. She bends down to pick up the mask, and the guys get even worse, inviting her to have some drinks, promising they would buy her something nice to make up for it. One of the drunk guys becomes furious for being ignored by her and grabs her arm. Jenny asks him to let her go before she calls the police. The drunk man grabs her tightly, claiming that she hit him first, so it was purely self-defense, and that she couldn't do anything. Jenny firmly tells him that he was very rude to her. She slaps his hand, insisting that he let go of her arm. Now the drunk guy begins to threaten her, claiming that she hit him first. Holding his own hand, he says that he will defend himself from that too. Jenny is terrified in the face of danger. The man begins to lift his hand toward her. Paralyzed by fear, she waits defenseless for his strike. However, something unexpected happens. Jenny opens her eyes to understand. Right in front of her, Stanley was holding the drunk man's arm, and right beside him was Barney. He asked the man what he thought he was doing. Jenny was very surprised, although still extremely frightened by the situation. Stanley finally realized that Jenny was the chicken. Squeezing the guy's arm, Stanley tells him to go home and stop bothering hardworking people. The other drunk friend tries to defend him, saying that he knew martial arts. Suddenly, Barney gives a strong slap to his chest and grabs the clothes of the drunk friend firmly. With a threatening glare, Barney warns the man to stay where he is, or things could get very, very bad for him. Stanley says, "Enough." If the two men didn't leave, he would call the police. However, before they leave, he insists that they apologize to Jenny. Jenny and one of the drunks exchange furious looks with each other. She hears him insult Stanley, telling him not to be an idiot. Immediately, he tries to strike Stanley, claiming that he would never apologize to a loser wearing a chicken costume. But before he lands the punch, something Stanley didn't expect happens. Jenny uses the heavy chicken mask to strike the drunk man in the face. All three men are shocked watching the scene. Jenny curses the drunk guy a lot. He was struck on the nose. Our protagonist, once terrified, now growls with rage. Stanley gives a sincere smile. Jenny really was a very brave girl. The drunk guys begin to walk away from them, one of them apologizing while the other only complains. In a gesture of empathy, Stanley holds Jenny's hand. As the guys walk away, our protagonist looks at Stanley with curiosity. She stays silent for a few moments while watching them leave. Jenny is very embarrassed by what had just happened and by exposing herself that way in front of her boss. Stanley feels relieved to see that they left quickly and asks the young woman if she was okay. Without answering him, she puts the chicken costume back on. The young woman says nothing more and bows to him in gratitude. Completely devastated by what had happened, she walks toward the restaurant while Stanley watches her. Barney, still a little shaken, asks if Stanley and Jenny were okay. The young woman seemed extremely scared when they arrived. Good thing they didn't need to call the police. Stanley looked very sad after Jenny left without speaking to him. Back on the street, cars were honking nonstop. Sarah seemed to be very thoughtful and a little disappointed. Their date had been canceled because supposedly Samuel's mother had fallen at home. Sarah showed concern, asking if she was okay. The guy smiles, explaining that everything was fine, but that he had to go see her as soon as possible, so they could go see the ballet another night. Sarah was furious because of that mama's boy. She laments that Stanley Kwan's family is involved with the mafia because otherwise she wouldn't have to be dating Samuel. But why did he have to choose Jenny? Returning to some memories from the past, at school, Sarah had bought beautiful colored lipsticks for her friends. The girl tells the girls that she thought of them when she bought the lipsticks. While one thanks her, one of them complains, saying that she didn't like the color she received. Sarah gently suggests that they could trade, but before she finishes the sentence, one of the girls snatches the lipstick right out of her hand. Sarah feels offended by her friend's lack of manners. Suddenly, from the other side of the classroom, something catches their attention. It looked like a fight was happening. Two girls were fighting because a compact powder had broken. One of them pushed the friend, yelling that her makeup had been perfect before the friend touched it. Nearby, Jenny calmly read a book. Then Jenny puts the book on the table and stands up while the two girls fight. Jenny shows a brand new compact powder to one of the girls, asking if that was her shade. The two look a little stunned at the expensive compact powder Jenny was showing. Our protagonist says she bought it yesterday, but it wasn't the right shade for her, and she insists that her classmate keep it. Jenny places the powder in one of the girls' hands and quickly walks away from them. She managed to end that fight in a very effective way. Sarah and her friends watch as the girls comment that that brand of powder was very exclusive and therefore must have been very expensive. One of Sarah's friends remarks how Jenny seemed very rich and sophisticated. Another girl complains, asking if the friend was calling all of them commoners. Another girl says that if she were as rich as Jenny, she would be very sophisticated too. Sarah becomes sad and thoughtful hearing the awful dialogue from her friends. The young woman silently looks at the lipstick in her hand. A few years later, at Hotel HU, Sarah saw that her school friend had been hired as an intern. Some interns praised her, while others gossiped that Jenny's resume was only average because she apparently hadn't completed her studies. When Sarah sees her friend, she is relieved that she got the job, but secretly she was feeling very superior to Jenny. Back to the present in the traffic jam, she just wanted to find a way out of there. She gets even more upset when a driver passes her without using a turn signal. She honks loudly. In her thoughts, she wonders how Jenny could still be so irritating. Back to the present again, at Hotel HU. Someone suddenly runs in front of some men walking. Stanley and Barney spotted someone running in front of them. The elevator arrives on the 15th floor of the hotel. Inside the elevator, a man seemed a little scared of the woman standing behind him. Stanley and Barney notice how strange that situation is. The elegant hallway was lit by modern lamps. A large statue decorated the executive floor. Stanley and Barney look at the statue for a few moments. Curious, Barney asks the boss if something happened between him and Jenny. Stanley lets out a long sigh. Right beside them, Jenny was crouched behind the statue. Maybe she thought she had been discreet, but that wasn't exactly the case. After recent events, our protagonist didn't have the courage to look Stanley in the eyes. When Jenny was only 3 years old, her mother left. As soon as she turned 17, her father also left because of the stress of losing a lot of money after losing his business. After becoming an orphan, her aunt took her in during that difficult moment. However, living with her aunt was not easy, because her uncle always came home drunk, causing many problems. She tries to force the man out of the house, but he was stronger than her. Jenny's uncle didn't want to take her in. He wanted to throw his niece into the streets to fend for herself. Her aunt begs him to let her stay there until she finishes school. Jenny hears with sadness her aunt and uncle arguing because of her, and the man said she should simply drop out of school, get a job, and pay them back for their generosity. Because of that, she dropped out of school. Carrying only one suitcase, Jenny leaves her aunt and uncle's house. At that very moment, our protagonist knew she could count only on herself. Years later, Jenny had gotten a job in a restaurant. She skillfully fried rice on the hot griddle. With her exceptional skills, she shaped a perfect heart using the fried rice. Some customers began to arrive at the restaurant. Jenny welcomes them, and she looks quite surprised. The young woman's eyes looked sad and distant. Some guys who had studied with her in high school had heard from another guy that she was working there. They sat at a table and started teasing one of the boys who had a crush on Jenny. Clearly immature, the boys suggest that Jenny would quickly fall in love with one of them because he had been accepted into a good university. The guy with glasses was very shy, but he was willing to try flirting with her that night. They order 3 more portions of fried rice in heart shape. While Jenny prepares their meal, the boys joke among themselves, encouraging their friend to go talk to her. The shy guy finally gathers the courage to go talk to her. Jenny, annoyed by that approach, splits the rice in half. The boys are shocked by the girl's attitude. She tells them, with a threatening look, to just enjoy the meal. She wasn't the type of woman who had time for silly flirting. The fried rice now formed a broken heart. The young woman remembers several traumatic experiences at previous jobs that made her want to give up. From angry customers throwing clothes at her, to jobs that forced her to wear ridiculous outfits and hand out free makeup samples at the mall. During some of those times, while handing out the little packets, she would end up running into girls who studied with her in high school. However, instead of people moving on with their own lives, Jenny constantly overheard them gossiping about her life, about the problems her family had, among other things. To avoid more comments, Jenny always ended up giving them extra samples, especially because for at least 17 years, Jenny knew what it was like to be loved. She repeated to herself that it was the only thing that really mattered. However, the previous night, with the drunk guys and Stanley stepping in, she felt so embarrassed, so pathetic. All she wanted most was to disappear from there. At that moment, even though she had managed to get help, Jenny was feeling very fragile. Just seeing Stanley made her want to vanish. And because of that, she ran away and tried to hide behind the big statue in the hotel. Until a few days earlier, she thought she was doing well. But then, why in that moment did she feel everything falling apart? Interrupting that cruel flow of thoughts, someone asks what she was doing there. Stanley looks at Jenny while she is still crouched on the floor. He was smiling at her. But Jenny, with her strong personality, didn't want to accept defeat. The CEO pauses for a few moments. Barney was there with him in the hallway, waiting so they could continue their work. The secretary suspected that something was going on between his boss and the intern. He remembered how strange the previous night had been. Barney had good intuition. Moments later, he enters Stanley's office, asking if the boss would stay late. Stanley tells him that he was so focused on work that he hadn't noticed the time, but he needed to finish that proposal. Concerned, he asked the boss if he would at least like to eat something. Barney offers a few options, but Stanley had something else in mind. Annoyed, Barney asks what he would like for dinner. Stanley confesses that what he really needed was a good beer and fried chicken. He says it's a great idea and that they should go back to that restaurant that had opened recently. Barney analyzes the situation coldly and logically. He assumes the boss wants to go back to the restaurant from last night to see Jenny. Was that the reason? Or was there something else? A few moments earlier, he had told Stanley to apologize to her, whatever had happened between him and Jenny. The CEO justifies himself, saying he didn't do anything. Stanley hears Barney tell him that she was possibly embarrassed because her boss caught her working a second job. After that, Stanley asks Barney to go ahead of him because he had forgotten some things in the conference room. Barney watches Stanley supposedly go get something in another room. The guy tries to guess in every possible way what was going on between the two of them. Then someone calls Barney's attention. He turns around and runs into Sarah. She asks what he was thinking about because she had been calling him for a while. The young woman explains that she was looking for Stanley everywhere, but there was no sign of him. Barney asks Sarah if she would like to leave a message for him. If she passed by there now, she would see Stanley talking to Jenny, and that could be bad. Sarah gives a slight laugh and explains to the secretary that it was something a little personal. Besides that, it was a little urgent. She asks if Stanley was in the conference room then. Barney hesitates about whether to let the girl pass, and she waits patiently. That whole delicate situation was because of his boss. He starts getting nervous, wondering why Stanley put him in that delicate position. Right there next to them, Stanley had his head lowered. Covering his face with his hands, it was impossible to see his expression. Jenny looked at him with concern. The CEO looked terrible, clearly shaken, and from his nose a red drop was falling. What could have happened to leave him in that state? And that's it for today, everyone. What do you all think? Sarah does everything to seem perfect, but deep down you can tell she's falling apart. If you were Jenny, would you keep avoiding Stanley or face your feelings and talk to him? Tell me more in the comments. I love reading your theories. The name of this series is Check Into Your Heart, and our recap went up to chapter 21. And if you want more, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any new videos I post. Kisses, and see you next time.